Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was raised in a lab and rescued by Aizawa? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and disinfectant as Shoyuta Aizawa and Hisashi Yamada made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the underground lab. The aftermath of their raid was evident: broken equipment, shattered glass, and the distant sound of law enforcement securing the perimeter. "Man, this place gives me the creeps," Hisashi muttered, his usual boisterous voice subdued by the grim reality before them. His gaze flitted from the overturned medical tables to the eerie, empty cells lining the walls. Shoyuta, ever the stoic, said nothing as his sharp eyes scanned their surroundings. They were looking for survivors, the quirkless individuals who had been abducted and subjected to cruel experiments. Every second counted. Then, from a corner room half concealed by a collapsed metal shelf, they heard a faint rustling sound. Shoyuta signaled Hisashi to stay alert as he cautiously pushed aside the debris. Inside, two boys huddled together, both clearly shaken and bearing the marks of the lab's cruel experiments. One had wild green hair and freckled cheeks, his body trembling and his gaze darting around in panic. He pressed himself against the wall, his breathing shallow and erratic. The other, with messy indigo locks and a tired but defiant expression, placed a protective hand in front of his companion, a silent promise to shield him from further harm. "It's okay," Shoyuta said softly, lowering his capture weapon to appear less threatening. "We're pro-heroes. You're safe now." The green-haired boy flinched at the sound of his voice, shrinking further into himself, his lips parted but unable to produce a sound. His panic was palpable. The indigo-haired boy's jaw tightened. "Don't come any closer," he snapped, his voice hoarse but firm. "I don't trust you." His protective stance didn't waver. Hisashi blinked in surprise, concern deepening in his golden eyes. "Hey now, we're here to help." "Help?" The boy Hitoshi, they would later learn, scoffed bitterly. "Where were you when they took us?" "When they—" His voice broke off, his fingers curling into a fist. Shoyuta and Hisashi exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. These two weren't just victims, they were survivors of something truly horrific. Shuta's voice softened even further. "We're sorry we didn't come sooner," he said. "But we're here now. Let's get you both out of here first. Then we'll talk." Hisashi, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed, a quiet show of solidarity as husbands and heroes, added, "You're not alone anymore." The quiet hum of the police station was a stark contrast to the chaos of the underground lab. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glow over the sterile room where Shoyuta Aizawa and Hisashi Yamada sat across from Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched in front of Shoyuta, while Hisashi's foot tapped rhythmically against the tiled floor. In the corner of the room, Izuku Midoriya and Hitoshi Shinso sat side by side on a worn-out couch. Izuku's gaze was fixed firmly on the floor, his fingers tangled together in his lap. Every so often, he flinched at the distant sound of a raised voice or the closing of a door. A faint wisp of dark smoke curled around his shoulders, dissipating into the air, subtle, but enough to catch Shuta's trained eye. Smokescreen. Hitoshi, for his part, kept a wary eye on anyone who passed by the door, his body angled protectively toward Izuku. His jaw was tight, and his hand rested lightly on Izuku's sleeve, a silent anchor to keep him grounded. "They won't talk to anyone," Naomasa finally said, his voice low as he leaned forward. "Not the medics, not the counselors. Hitoshi only says something when it's to push people away, and Izuku hasn't spoken a word." Shuta's jaw tightened. His gaze didn't move from Izuku's trembling form. "They've been through hell. It's not surprising." Hisashi's usual exuberance was absent, replaced by a quiet intensity. "What happens now?" Naomasa rubbed the back of his neck. "Social services has been contacted. Given the severity of their situation, they'll be placed in a specialized care facility until a more permanent arrangement is found." As if on cue, The smoke thickened for a split second before retreating back into Izuku's skin. His breathing hitched, turning ragged and uneven. A sudden snap echoed through the room as Black Whip lashed out from Izuku's wrist, striking the edge of the table before recoiling back into him. The table groaned under the brief impact, a shallow dent marring its surface. Hisashi startled at the sudden movement but quickly schooled his expression into something softer. Hey, he said, keeping his voice gentle but steady. It's okay. You're safe here. Izuku didn't respond, but the smoke curling from his shoulders slowed, thinning out just a bit. Hitoshi's grip on Izuku's sleeve tightened. Stop, he whispered urgently, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Hisashi tilted his head slightly, his voice still soft. I know you don't want to talk to us, and that's okay. But, can I at least know your names? For a long moment, there was silence. Then, without looking up, Hitoshi muttered, Hitoshi. Hisashi's smile was small but genuine. That's a cool name. He paused, his gaze flickering to Izuku. And you? Izuku's fingers tightened around each other, his breathing still shaky. He didn't answer, but Hitoshi, after a brief moment of hesitation, answered for him. Izuku. Hisashi nodded slowly. Hitoshi and Izuku. Got it. We're not going anywhere. Hitoshi said flatly, possibly pertaining to what Naomasa said earlier. Naomasa sighed. It's not up to me, kid. It's protocol. Shoyuda spoke then, his voice calm but firm. Then override the protocol. Both Naomasa and Hisashi blinked in surprise. Shoyuda, Hisashi started, but Shoyuda cut him off. They won't trust anyone else. You saw how they reacted to the medics. Putting them in a facility full of strangers will only make things worse. His gaze was steady, unyielding. Hisashi and I will take them in. If that's what they want, Hisashi chimed in, glancing at the kids for confirmation. The older kid, Hitoshi, frowned but after a few moments, gave a nod. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else though. Naomasa studied him carefully. That's not how this works. You know that, he told Shoyuda. Then make it work. The room fell into silence, broken only by the distant murmur of voices outside. The smoke in the air swirled lazily, still present, still clinging. Hisashi, finally catching on to Shuda's train of thought, added softly, they need stability. They need people who understand what they've been through, who won't push too hard or expect too much too soon. Izuku's breathing had slowed slightly, though a stray tendril of Black Whip still curled faintly around his wrist, twitching in response to every sound. His body was tense, his shoulders hunched as if waiting for another threat. Hitoshi's jaw was still tight, but his eyes flicked between the two heroes, suspicion warring with a tentative flicker of hope. Naomasa exhaled slowly. I can push for temporary guardianship while social services processes everything. But it won't be simple. Shuda's voice was resolute. We're not asking for simple. We're asking for what's best for them. Naomasa gave a reluctant nod. I'll make the calls. From the corner of the room, Hitoshi's grip on Izuku's sleeve loosened, just a little. And the smoke for now began to fade. The ride home was silent. Izuku and Hitoshi sat in the back seat of the car, a deliberate distance between them and the two men in the front. Hisashi had tried to fill the silence with his usual chatter, but after a single flinch from Izuku and a cold glare from Hitoshi, he had fallen into a quiet, uneasy hum. Shoyuda didn't say a word, his focus split between the road ahead and the two boys in the rearview mirror. When they finally arrived at Shoyuda and Hisashi's home, the air felt too heavy, too still. It was a modest place, clean, warm, lived in, but for Izuku and Hitoshi, it might as well have been another cage. Here we are, Hisashi announced, his cheeriness present but toned down for the kids' sake. Hisashi and Shoyuda stood back as the kids entered their home. Hitoshi led the way as always while Izuku closely followed. They stuck near the wall, every step careful as if they were expecting the floor before them to fall if they took a wrong step. Shoyuda went in first after the kids cleared a good distance, Hisashi trailing behind as he closed the door carefully behind him. Make yourselves at home, Shoyuda said as Hitoshi's eyes darted around the house as if expecting something to jump at them anytime soon. Your room will be upstairs next to ours. For now, why don't you two wash up and change out of your clothes? Izuku looked up in confusion, before he looked down again quickly. Heart hammering against his chest when he saw Shoyuta looking back at him already. He wasn't supposed to make eye contact. He wasn't allowed. Izuku gripped Hitoshi's shirt as his breathing started to pick up, smoke started unfurling from his shoulder. Are you okay, little listener? Hisashi asked, unconsciously reaching out to the kid just the smallest motion. A half gesture like he was about to pat Izuku's shoulder reassuringly. The reaction was immediate. A crack echoed through the room as black whips snapped out from Izuku's back, lashing wildly through the air. The tendrils slammed into a nearby chair, sending it skidding across the floor and crashing into the wall. Izuku's breathing spiked, his body rigid, and more tendrils flickered at his sides, pulsing with every rapid beat of his heart. Smoke began to curl around his shoulders, faint but growing thicker with every second. Shoyuta was quick to move, distancing himself between the kid and his husband just in time for one of the tendrils to slam against him. His arms up in defense as he blocked the tendril form hitting him directly, the force was strong enough to push them back. Shoyuta winced at the impact but kept his ground. Shuta's mind reeled in on how he could calm the kid down. Kid, he tried to call, but Izuku's eyes were wide, unseeing, the tendrils twitching like they had a mind of their own. His chest rose and fell too quickly, smoke swirling at his feet now. The black tendrils snapped against the floor once more, a brief flash of violence, before retreating only to flicker again. Kid, calm down, he tried again. Izuku, Hitoshi's voice cut through the panic, his voice firm, steady, an anchor. The black whip tendrils stilled, then slowly retracted back to Izuku. The smoke thinned, though it didn't disappear completely. His breathing remained ragged, but the room was quiet again. Hitoshi's hand found Izuku's sleeve, his grip was a bit tight, keeping the younger boy steady and grounded. Shoyuta didn't move from his spot. Hisashi stayed frozen too, though his smile had slipped into something more cautious. They stood like that for a few good seconds before Hitoshi finally moved, prompting Shoyuta to put his arms down. Hisashi swallowed. I'm sorry. Hitoshi glanced at him with a sharp glare but didn't say anything as he slowly pulled Izuku away, the kids venturing further to the house. Before they finally stopped at the bottom of the stairs that lead to the second floor. Izuku shrunk behind Hitoshi like he expected the stairs to come alive. Hitoshi turned to face Izuku before crouching down to Izuku's level before the adults heard Hitoshi's quiet voice in a gentler tone. I'll carry you, okay? Shoyuta and Hisashi exchanged confused glances as Izuku hesitantly let Hitoshi carry him, his tiny arms snaking around Hitoshi's neck as he buried his face on his shoulder, unwilling to witness how Hitoshi climbed the stairs carefully. The adults followed upstairs when they were sure that the kids had covered a safe distance for them before Shoyuta opened the guest room for them while Hisashi retreated to their own room to get the kids some spare clothes that could fit them. This is where you'll stay, he said as Hitoshi cautiously entered the room, Izuku still in his arms. The door next to yours is the bathroom, Shoyuta added as Hisashi placed folded clothes over the bed. The door by the end of the hall is mine and Hisashi's. I figure these clothes would be too big for you, but it's all we have, Hisashi said, but we'll go out tomorrow to buy some clothes for you. The door locks from the inside. No one is coming in unless you want them to. Shoyuta wasn't sure why he told them that, but judging by the falter from Hitoshi's glare it looked like he said the right thing. Shoyuta reached out to grab Hisashi's sleeve and carefully pulled him out of the room. We'll be downstairs if you need us, he said, swinging the door halfway closed before he and Hisashi went downstairs. Shoyuta looked back in time to see the door fully close, followed by the soft click of the lock. Once the door to the guest room closed behind them, the house fell into an uneasy silence. Hisashi let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. Well, that went well, he muttered, his voice laced with forced cheer. His gaze drifted to the broken chair, its leg bent at an odd angle, and the faint scorch mark on the wall where Black Whip had struck. Real smooth, Zashi. Shoyuta didn't respond right away. He knelt, inspecting the damage with a practiced eye not out of concern for the furniture, but for the sheer force behind Izuku's quirk. He's scared, Shoyuta finally said, straightening up. His quirks are tied to his emotions. Yeah, Hisashi said softly, grabbing the chair and hauling it upright despite its broken leg. And Hitoshi's not gonna let anyone near him. Not even us. Shoyuta didn't argue. Instead, he began gathering the splinters of wood littering the floor, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, upstairs, the guest room was quiet except for the faint sound of Izuku's still unsteady breathing. After locking the door, Hitoshi crouched down again for Izuku's feet to touch the floor before he let Izuku go. He watched as Izuku looked around cautiously. The room wasn't much a bed, a desk, a small closet, but it might as well have been a different world to Izuku. Hitoshi watched Izuku carefully, the way his brother's breathing was shallow, the way his shoulders trembled just slightly. He didn't tell him to calm down. Didn't tell him to move. Instead, Hitoshi shifted off the door and sat down on the bed and patted the free space next to him, urging the younger male to sit next to him. Izuku moved silently and cautiously before reaching down to touch the soft mattress, his eyes widening at the texture before looking at Hitoshi with wide, curious eyes. Bed, Hitoshi said, gesturing toward the soft mattress with a smooth motion, his hand resting gently above the other to mimic the feeling of lying down. Izuku looked down at the sign as Hitoshi repeated the motion before following with his own shaky hands. Bed. Hitoshi nodded, the corner of his lips tugged by a small reassuring smile. Izuku looked back down on the bed, hand smoothing over the mattress before his fingertips touched the folded blanket that was placed in the middle of the bed. The kid flinched at the touch but hesitantly reached for it again. Hitoshi watched as Izuku signed again. Bed. Hitoshi shook his head, spreading his hands wide in front of him, then brought them together in a fluid motion, as if pulling the fabric up and over himself, mimicking the act of covering with a blanket. Blanket. He gave the sign a name. What's that? Izuku signed. It's to keep you warm, Hitoshi answered. Keep you safe. Izuku flinched at the word. He had only known it for a few hours. He didn't know what it exactly meant, only that it brought them out of the lab, out of the hurt, and out of Papa. Hitoshi reached for the blanket, unraveling it, and Izuku's eyes widened at how big it was. The older kid handed the blanket to him, waiting patiently for Izuku to reach out and take it. He reached out before gripping the fabric, eyes widening at how soft it felt in his hands as he sat down on the floor with it. The fabric that covered his small frame felt warm, felt safe. Shoyuta winced slightly as Hisashi dabbed antiseptic over his bruise, the part where Izuku's black whip had hit him, as they sat down by the kitchen counter. They hadn't come out of the room, Shoyuta said after a long moment of silence. They'll come out when they're ready, Hisashi answered, his eyes focused on his husband's bruise before bandaging it up and cleaning everything. We should prepare dinner for them though. It hasn't been a full day and you already want me to kill them with my cooking, Shoyuta answered, making Hisashi snort. Hisashi huffed a small laugh, the sound brief but warm. I meant, help me set the table, he said, moving to gather plates and utensils. A small smile crept Shuta's lips as he grabbed the dishes from the drying rack. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every small sound seemed magnified, the clink of plates, the soft rustle of Hisashi opening a bag of rice. It gnawed at him. They're scared, Shoyuta muttered, more to himself than anything. Hisashi's hand paused mid-motion. Of course they are, he said softly. But they're safe now. With us. Shuta's grip tightened around a glass for a fraction of a second before he set it down. We need to make sure they know that. Hisashi stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on Shuta's arm. We will. Hitoshi absently watched Izuku make himself comfortable on the floor at the far corner of the room with the blanket he had. The older kid was perched on the bed, hugging his knees close to his chest, a million thoughts running through his mind for him to point out which to focus on. But a smell caught his attention, making his head turn to the door. In his peripheral vision, he could see Izuku stop his movement as he, too, turned to the door. A faint aroma wafted through the small space of the door and entered their room. The scent was unfamiliar, not because they didn't recognize food, but because it smelled. But neither of them moved. Later, there was a soft knock at the door. Dinner's ready, Hisashi's voice called gently on the other side. Izuku trembled at the words, gathering the blanket in a bundle close to him as he squeezed himself at the small space between the wall and the closet. Smoke unfurled from his shoulder as his terror made itself known. Hitoshi was already on his feet, positioning himself in front of Izuku, his back to him a silent shield. His glare was fixed on the door, tense and unyielding, bracing himself for the moment the older men might force their way in. Back at the lab, food had never been a source of comfort. Stepping out of a room, responding to a call for meals, it often came with a price. The test. The trick. A punishment. The four of them stood in a tense, unyielding silence, a closed door between them like an unspoken barrier. The adults waited, hoping for a crack of trust, for the door to open from within. The kids waited too, not for comfort, but for the inevitable threat they feared would force its way through. Finally, after a few moments of silence, Shoyuta placed a hand on an anticipating Hizashi and shook his head, a silent gesture that tells the blonde that there was no chance tonight these kids would come out and sit with them. Not after what they've been through. On the other side of the door, Hitoshi could hear the shuffling of feet and the fading footsteps as the adults retreated back to the kitchen. His small frame still stood his ground for a few minutes, though as if expecting the door to burst. But it relaxed a bit when he realized that no threat was coming in, at least not right now, before he turned back to Izuku. Izuku looked back up at Hitoshi in his trembling form, wisps of smoke coming out of his shoulder like blankets of protection, signed hesitantly. Safe. Hitoshi didn't answer, didn't know how. Instead, he walked to where Izuku was and sat on the floor, tucking his knees close to his chest as he waited for Izuku to come out of his hiding place. Then slowly, Izuku moved as he shuffled next to Hitoshi, the blanket still in his tiny hands as he sat close to his brother. Hitoshi offered a small smile before reaching the other end of the blanket and pulling it to his lap as he shared Izuku's barrier to assure him. Minutes passed, and then the sound of footsteps retreating, then shuffling sounds that Hitoshi couldn't distinguish as he cradled an already asleep Izuku in his arms as the smaller child slept on the floor. A soft knock was enough to make Hitoshi flinch. But, thankfully it didn't wake Izuku up. We'll leave your dinner here. It was Shoyuta who spoke this time. Eat whenever you're ready. The footsteps faded and the house slipped back into stillness. The tray of food remained untouched, growing cold as the night wore on. When morning came, it was still there, rice hardened, vegetables limp, a quiet, unspoken reminder that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. Shoyuta woke first, moving through the quiet halls with a practiced ease, his steps soft enough not to disturb the fragile peace. Hizashi stirred not long after, padding into the kitchen with a yawn and a tired smile. It wasn't their usual chaotic morning. Hizashi would normally blast music through the speakers while Shoyuta grumbled over his coffee, but today, there was only silence. Because the guest room door upstairs remained closed. Hours passed. Shoyuta noticed it first. No sound of footsteps, no creak of floorboards, nothing. The two boys hadn't come out. Hizashi noticed it next. He kept glancing toward the staircase, his usual chatter absent, replaced by a tight-lipped concern. Finally, with a resigned sigh, Shoyuta picked up the untouched tray from the hallway, his jaw tightening at the sight of the cold, uneaten food. He didn't say anything, but his movements were deliberate as he scraped the stiff rice into the trash and rinsed the dishes, the sound of running water a poor substitute for the usual morning noise. Hizashi leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching his husband clean up the remains of a meal no one had touched. They're still not coming out, he murmured softly. Shoyuta didn't respond right away. He just set the now empty tray aside, the quiet clink of the plate against the counter the only answer he could give. The silence dragged on, broken only by the faint clink of dishes and the soft murmur of water from the sink. But upstairs, behind the closed door, the stillness was far more suffocating. Hitoshi stirred first, his stomach twisting in on itself, a deep, hollow ache from nearly a day without food. Hunger gnawed at him, a familiar sensation, one he'd learned to ignore when meals were a privilege dangled like a cruel reward. But it wasn't his own hunger that pulled him fully awake. It was Izuku. Curled up in the corner of the room, Izuku trembled, his small frame tight with discomfort. His stomach growled audibly, the sound so loud in the quiet that it almost startled Hitoshi. And then the softest whimper. A painful little noise that escaped Izuku's lips, almost as though he didn't mean to let it out. Hitoshi's chest squeezed. Izuku needed food. Needed help. For a long moment, Hitoshi didn't move. He just stared at the door, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should, like it was more than wood and hinges, but a barrier, a warning. In the lab, stepping out of a room without permission had consequences. His back still ached at the memory, the ghost of whip marks burning like they had just been inflicted. His last attempt to beg for food had earned him those scars. But Izuku whimpered again, clutching his stomach. And that was enough. Hitoshi's hand shook as he reached for the doorknob. His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind screaming at him to stop, to sit down, to wait, to not make the same mistake again, but his feet carried him forward. The door creaked open. The sound was soft, but it echoed like a gunshot in his ears. And then there was a shadow at the top of the stairs. Shoyuda. Hitoshi froze, heart leaping into his throat. His body tensed, instinct screaming at him to retreat back into the room, to lock the door and brace for the punishment that would follow. "I am sorry," Hitoshi stammered, his voice a broken whisper, cracked and hoarse from disuse and panic. "But Izuku needs food. Please, I wasn't trying to." The words tumbled out in a frantic, disjointed rush, each syllable tripping over the next, as if the faster he spoke, the less likely he'd be punished. His breathing hitched, shallow and uneven, his chest rising and falling in quick, desperate gasps. His wide, wild eyes locked onto Shoyuda, pupils blown with fear, not seeing a tired, concerned man in sweatpants and a loose shirt, but a looming figure from the past. His back burned with phantom pain, the sharp sting of a whip, the cold bite of metal restraints. His mind screamed at him to shrink back, to drop to his knees, to beg before the punishment came, because it always did. Stepping out of the cell meant disobedience. Disobedience meant pain. I wasn't, his voice cracked again, a sob threatening to escape, but he swallowed it down like poison. "Please, Izuku's hungry, I didn't mean, I'm sorry, please don't." He flinched, his body already preparing for a strike that never came. Shoyuda didn't move. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't so much as blink too fast. He just looked at Hitoshi, really looked at him, at the way his small frame trembled like a leaf in a storm, at the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, not in defiance, but in defense. A silent brace for impact. And it clicked too easily, too painfully. This wasn't just fear. This was conditioning. This was a boy who had learned, over and over again, that asking for something, needing something, was a punishable offense. Shuda's throat tightened, but his voice remained steady, a soft, even tone that didn't match the storm in his chest. "You're not in trouble," he said, slowly, carefully. "You're not going to get hurt." Hitoshi's breath hitched. He didn't move. "This isn't a cage," Shoyuda continued, his voice softer now. "You don't have to stay in that room. You can come out whenever you want." A pause, gentle, deliberate. "And if you need something, food, water, anything, you can ask." Hitoshi's shoulders shook. His gaze darted between Shoyuda and the staircase, like he was calculating how fast he could run if this was a trick. From the bottom of the stairs, Hisashi didn't make a sound. He stood frozen, fingers digging into the wall, his heart aching with every broken, panicked word Hitoshi had choked out. His usual brightness was gone, snuffed out by the quiet horror of watching a child beg for something as simple as food like it was a crime. The silence stretched fragile and thin. Hitoshi swallowed hard, his voice barely audible when he finally spoke. "Can we have food? Not we need food. Not Izuku is hungry. Can we have food?" Like he wasn't sure if it was allowed. The question cracked something in both men, a quiet, shattering pain they didn't dare show on their faces. "Of course," Shoyuda said instantly, no hesitation, no second thought. "We'll make you something right now." Before Hitoshi could flinch again, Hisashi was already moving, practically running down the stairs into the kitchen, grabbing eggs, rice, whatever he could get his hands on. His fingers trembled slightly as he worked, his usual flair absent, replaced by a quiet, urgent need to do something, to fix something that couldn't be fixed with just a meal. Minutes later, they were back at the door. A tray in both Hisashi and Shuda's hands, one for each kid, steam rising from warm rice and miso soup. The door was closed again. But when Shoyuta knocked softly, no sharpness, no authority, just a gentle tap-tap, and Hisashi said, "We brought you some breakfast." The silence wasn't as long this time. Because the door slowly, hesitantly opened. Hitoshi peeked through the small crack of the door cautiously, his eyes zeroed in on the tray of food that Hisashi was holding before he slowly opened the door. Shoyuta, who stood behind Hisashi as a pillar of support, noticed how the bed seemed untouched. The next thing he noticed was the crumpled blanket placed at the corner of the room with green curls sticking out of it, Izuku. Hitoshi moved to get the tray from Hisashi's hand but hesitated. He trembled too much, either from hunger or from the scare he had just experienced earlier, to trust himself to handle holding a tray properly. Hisashi caught on. "Oh, I can put it on the desk," he said, then quickly added, "If you'd be okay with it." Hitoshi looked up at him, calculating his choices carefully before finally stepping back and letting the adults in. They moved slowly and carefully, mindful of the sleeping bundle that had taken refuge at the corner of the room. Hisashi glanced a worrying stare at Shoyuta when he saw that neither kids had also changed their clothes. "Hitoshi," Shoyuta called as gently as possible, but it still made Hitoshi flinch. "Did the clothes not fit you?" Hitoshi was not expecting the question as his eyes darted at the neatly folded clothes that Hisashi had placed on the bed last night, then back at Shoyuta before shaking his head and spoke. "We didn't. I don't," his knuckles white as he gripped the hem of his shirt nervously as he tried to think of something to say. "It's okay," Shoyuta answered. "It's just, we brought the clothes in so you could change into something warmer and comfortable. Your clothes aren't exactly built to withstand cold temperatures." Hitoshi nodded, but his expression tells Shoyuta that the boy knew it. Hisashi cleared his throat to catch the older kid's attention as he smiled at him warmly. "I made soup to warm you and Izuku up. Be careful though, because it may be too hot for you or for the little listener here. I also made fried eggs and rice so you could have something easy on the stomach, since I figured you haven't eaten anything since last night." Hitoshi nodded, staying rooted to his spot as the adults carefully filed out of their room. His hand remained clenched at his side, his breathing shallow, but his eyes wary and sharp, tracked every movement Shoyuta and Hisashi made. When Shoyuta reached for the knob to close the door on his way out, the quiet click of the latch starting to catch, a sudden hand shot out. Hitoshi's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the door, stopping it mid-close. For a moment, no one moved. Shuta's gaze dropped to the small, pale hand gripping the door, knuckles white from the force behind it, before traveling up to Hitoshi's face. The kid didn't say a word, but the silent plea in his purple eyes spoke louder than anything. "Don't close it. Don't trap us." Understanding settled in Shuta's chest like a heavy stone. He let go of the knob without a sound, the door swinging back open just a few inches, not fully ajar, but not closed either. A compromise. A reassurance. He didn't say anything, but a small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. Hitoshi's grip slowly loosened, though he didn't move from his spot. As Shoyuta turned to follow Hisashi back downstairs, he allowed himself one last glance at the two boys. Hitoshi was already moving again, his hand gentle now as he crouched beside Izuku, whispering something too soft to hear. Izuku stirred, a faint whimper escaping his lips, his face pinched in discomfort. Hitoshi didn't flinch at the sound. Instead, he carefully shook Izuku's shoulder, his voice quiet but steady as he tried to wake him. It was a tender moment, one that reminded Shoyuta of the fierce, protective bond between them. A bond forged in pain and survival, but still a bond nonetheless. The door remained open. Just as the two adults landed the stairs, their attention was caught on the vibration from Hisashi's phone when a text was received. Hisashi had made a quiet call the night before, voice hushed but hopeful. Now, standing in their living room, Nemuri and Oboro shuffled through the bags of children's clothes and toiletries they'd brought over. "I wasn't sure about sizes," Nemuri said softly, holding up a pair of sweatpants and a few plain t-shirts. "So I grabbed a few options. Figured comfort over style right now." "That's perfect," Hisashi replied, his usual boisterous energy replaced by something softer. "Thanks for doing this, guys." Oboro leaned against the back of the couch, his usual grin subdued. "How are they holding up?" Hisashi rubbed the back of his neck. It's been a struggle, he admitted. We're taking it one step at a time. They're scared. Real scared. Hitoshi's holding it together, but Izuku's worse off. Nemuri guessed, her voice gentle. Shoyuta gave a small nod. He barely looks at us. Won't speak. There was a silence, heavy but understanding. We didn't want to overwhelm them, so we figured it's better you guys don't meet them just yet, Hisashi added. I don't want them thinking we're parading people in front of them. Nemuri smiled softly. Whenever they're ready. After a few more quiet words and a promise to check in again soon, Nemuri and Oboro slipped out, leaving Shoyuta and Hisashi to gather the bags of clothes and toiletries. They climbed the stairs slowly, their footsteps light. When they reached the boys' room, the sight of the still slightly open door made Hisashi's heart lift just a little. Progress. Then, they heard it Hitoshi's voice, quiet but clear. Plant, he said. That's a plant, Izuku. A beat of silence, then another murmur. Window. That's a window. Pillow. Shoyuta and Hisashi exchanged a glance, a flicker of hope between them. Hitoshi was teaching Izuku the names of things in the room. Simple objects. Foreign concepts to boys who had spent so long caged in sterile walls. Hisashi knocked softly, a gentle rhythm meant not to startle. Hitoshi. The quiet rustle of fabric. A moment of hesitation. Yeah? Came Hitoshi's reply. We got some clothes for you both, Hisashi said. Can we come in? Another pause, longer this time. Hisashi held his breath. Yeah. They stepped inside carefully, and their first sight was the empty food bowls stacked neatly on the tray. Another small step forward. But Izuku was curled in the corner of the room, wedged between the wall and the closet. His blanket was clutched tightly around him, his small fingers digging into the fabric, and already, a faint haze of smoke began to pool around his feet. Hisashi's heart broke a little at the sight. Hey, Shoyuta said softly, setting the bags down near the bed far enough from Izuku's corner to feel non-threatening. We bought some clothes that would fit you better. We brought some toiletries too. If you want to wash up, the bathroom's just down the hall. Silence. Or, Shoyuta added, if you don't want to leave the room, we can bring you some water and cloths instead. It's your choice. Hitoshi gave a small nod, then tilted his head slightly toward Izuku. It's okay, Izuku, he murmured. You can come out. Izuku's wide, tear-filled eyes darted from Shoyuta to Hisashi, his small frame still trembling. Slowly, his hands moved. Safe? He signed. Hisashi, his chest tight with emotion, responded with smooth, familiar gestures. Safe, he signed back, adding a warm smile for good measure. His movements were fluid, confident, the kind of fluency that came from years of practice, from making a language part of himself. Hisashi hadn't just learned sign language, he had embraced it, mastered it. It was a lifeline when his quirk first manifested, a way to navigate a world that suddenly seemed too loud. And now, it was a bridge between him and Izuku. Behind Hisashi, Shoyuta couldn't help but smile softly. He wasn't as fluent in sign language as his husband, but he had learned it because Hisashi mattered, because their world had to include that silent language. It was one of the countless ways Shoyuta had fallen for him. The loud, brash man who could fill a stadium with his voice was also the same man who spoke with his hands when words weren't enough. And now, watching him carefully pace himself, softening his edges for the sake of two frightened boys, Shoyuta felt his heart ache with love all over again. Izuku blinked in surprise. His small head tilted, and after a long beat of hesitation he uncurled himself from the wall only to shuffle behind Hitoshi, still using his brother as a shield. But it wasn't fear in his eyes now. It was curiosity. Hisashi shifted slightly, careful to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. He gestured toward the neatly stacked bags by the bed. You can put the clothes in the closet if you'd like, he told Hitoshi as he signed the words, making sure his hands moved at an easy pace for Izuku to follow too. If anything doesn't fit or if you don't like something, just put it back in the bags, we can return them and find something better. Hitoshi's sharp eyes flickered toward the bags, then back to the adults. He gave a small nod, the motion stiff but thoughtful. Izuku peeked out from behind him, eyes darting from the bags to Hitoshi's hands as if committing every sign to memory. Neither boy said anything else, but they didn't retreat further either. That, in itself, felt like progress. With that, Hitoshi and Shoyuta took their cue to leave. They stepped back carefully, moving at a pace slow enough to be non-threatening but natural enough not to draw attention to the effort. Hitoshi offered one last reassuring smile before pulling the door closed only halfway, leaving that small, vital crack open between them. The moment they stepped into the hallway, a silent exhale passed between them. Shoyuta caught the subtle curve of Hitoshi's lips, the quiet happiness that settled in his eyes despite the tension still lining his shoulders. He bumped their arms together as they made their way downstairs, a silent acknowledgement of everything they weren't saying out loud. They didn't need words to know they were thinking the same thing. This was a good start. By the time they reached the dining area, the warmth of that moment lingered between them, a small but steady ember. Hitoshi stretched his arms overhead before dropping into a chair, already pulling a stack of papers toward him. "All right, let's get to work before my brain decides to check out," he murmured, tone light but lacking his usual volume. Shoyuta hummed in agreement, settling in with his own papers. Between pro-hero duties and teaching, the day ahead would be long, but at least it had started with something good. Izuku watched as Hitoshi pulled out the clothes from the bags and stacked them nearly on the drawers of the closet. When the adults got out, Izuku retreated back to his original spot while Hitoshi cautiously walked towards the bags Hitoshi and Shoyuta brought before slowly pulled out the items inside. Occasionally, Hitoshi would pull something out of the bag and Izuku would ask, "What's that?" Hitoshi, ever so patient in answering his brother's questions, would answer. "A shirt, a pair of pants, a pair of shorts, pajamas, socks, a hairbrush, more blankets, a towel which was definitely not a blanket according to Hitoshi, and finally, toothbrush," Hitoshi answered, holding out 2 soft-bristled toothbrushes for Izuku to see. "What does it do?" "Clean your teeth," Hitoshi answered. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. It was something so foreign to the boy because back at the lab, they didn't clean their teeth, they didn't clean at all, and yet Hitoshi knew these things all too well. "Do you want me to show you how it works?" Hitoshi asked hesitantly, taking in Izuku's curiosity and trying to see how far he pushed further. Izuku looked conflicted but otherwise nodded. Hitoshi didn't move, his grip tightening slightly on the toothbrushes. Showing Izuku how to use them meant stepping out of the room meant taking Izuku into the hallway, to the bathroom down the hall. He glanced at the half-open door, then back at Izuku. The younger boy's eyes were already fixed on it, wide and unblinking, his small frame shrinking further into himself as if the very idea of crossing the threshold was too much. His fingers twisted into the edge of his blanket, knuckles pale, his breathing quick and shallow. Hitoshi swallowed. He could see it, the fear, the hesitation. The memory of stepping out of their cells, back at the lab, where every unauthorized movement had been met with punishment. It was written all over Izuku's trembling form. We can use the sink in the bathroom," Hitoshi said softly, his voice gentle but uncertain. "It's just down the hall." He paused, his mind racing for the right words. "There's a bath too, a big tub with water." "Nice." Izuku didn't respond. His gaze darted between the open door and Hitoshi's face, his shoulders curling inward as if expecting a blow that never came. Hitoshi's heart twisted. "I'll stay with you the whole time," he added, quieter this time. "We don't have to close the door. No one's gonna get mad." Izuku's lower lip quivered. His hands were still shaking, but after a long, painful moment, he gave a tiny, reluctant nod so small it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't agreement, it was fear-laced surrender. And Hitoshi realized then, this wasn't about curiosity or learning. For Izuku, stepping out of this room wasn't just scary, it was dangerous. "Okay." Hitoshi let out a sigh of relief he realized he had been holding before he gathered 2 towels, one for him and one for Izuku, before turning to his brother and offering a comforting hand for Izuku to hold. Reluctantly, Izuku took it, his free hand gripping his blanket close to his body for comfort as Hitoshi slowly led him outside. Izuku expected pain as soon as his feet was out in the hall. Both boys stood, unsure and hesitating, at the quiet and empty hall just a step away from their room. Hitoshi looked down at Izuku, checking to see if he was okay before offering him a hesitant smile and started walking for the bathroom. They moved slowly, like how they did the first time they arrived at the house. But unlike before, Izuku's eyes did not stay downcast to the floor. Instead, he scanned every shadow and every corner as they slowly made their way to the bathroom, expecting something to leap out and drag him back to the place they'd both escaped from. Izuku's hand clung tightly to Hitoshi's, small fingers curled around his like a lifeline. His other hand fisted the edge of his worn blanket, dragging it along the floor behind him, a familiar weight in an unfamiliar world. Wisps of smoke still drifted from his fingertips, faint but anxious, swirling like a silent alarm. Hitoshi didn't move, didn't pull him forward. He just stood there, patient, letting Izuku feel the solid warmth of his hand, proof that he wasn't alone. The hallway stretched ahead of them, empty and quiet, but Izuku's wide green eyes darted to every corner, every shadow. His breathing quickened at the faint creak of a floorboard somewhere downstairs, probably just Hisashi or Shoyuta, but Izuku flinched, his grip on Hitoshi's hand tightening until his knuckles went white. More smoke spiraled from his free hand, curling between the folds of his blanket. "Hey," Hitoshi said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "It's just the house." "That sound?" "It's the floor. It does that sometimes." Izuku's head jerked up to look at him, his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Hitoshi gave his hand a slight squeeze, not too much, not enough to startle, just enough to remind Izuku that he was there. That this wasn't the lab. Slowly, carefully, Hitoshi reached over with his free hand and lightly brushed a thumb over Izuku's smoke-trailing fingers. "You don't need this right now," he whispered, his touch as soft as a breath. "There's no danger. Just me." The smoke faltered, still there, but thinner, weaker. Izuku didn't let go of the blanket, his knuckles still tight around the fabric, but his grip on Hitoshi's hand loosened just a little. Hitoshi offered a small, steady smile. "See? Just a noisy old house." Izuku blinked, his gaze flickering back to the hallway. His fingers still trembled, still clung to the blanket like a shield, but the wild panic in his eyes had dulled into something quieter. Hesitant. Wary. But not terrified. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Hitoshi took a slow step forward into the hallway, his hand still firmly holding Izuku's. "We'll go slow," he murmured. "You can keep your blanket. And you don't have to let go of me. I'll show you the bathroom, okay?" For a moment, Izuku didn't move. Then a nod. And together, one clutching a hand, the other a blanket, they took their first, careful steps down the hall. When they finally reached the bathroom, Izuku was welcomed with a series of unfamiliar things that for a moment, his fear was forgotten and replaced with curiosity as he looked around the bathroom in awe while Hitoshi placed their things on the sink and started to fill the tub with warm water. Izuku looked at the tub with amazement as he watched the big tub be filled with water. A hand tentative and curiously reaching down to feel the warm water, and for a moment, a feeling of contentment and relaxation washed over Izuku's tense frame. "Zuku," Hitoshi called softly, drawing Izuku's gaze away from the running water. He held up the toothbrushes, now free from their packets, one slightly bigger, the other smaller with soft bristles. "We can brush our teeth now." Izuku's fingers tightened around the edges of his blanket, pulling it closer to his chest like a shield. His wide green eyes flicked from the toothbrushes to Hitoshi's face, then back again. There was a quiet hesitation in his stance, like he was bracing for something, but after a long beat, he gave a small, uncertain nod. Hitoshi didn't move too quickly. Instead, he held out the smaller toothbrush, letting Izuku take it at his own pace. When Izuku's hand finally, slowly, reached out and grasped the handle, Hitoshi offered him a small smile. "Okay," Hitoshi said softly. "So, first we need to put some toothpaste on it. Just a little like this." He squeezed a small dollop of toothpaste onto his own toothbrush, holding it out so Izuku could see the size. "You don't need a lot," he added. "Just enough to clean your teeth. See?" Izuku watched closely, his grip still tight on the blanket with one hand and the toothbrush with the other. His feet stayed rooted to the floor, like he was still deciding whether this was safe. Hitoshi kept his voice steady, calm. "You try it," he encouraged, offering the toothpaste tube. It took Izuku a moment, his fingers trembling slightly as he fumbled with the cap, but Hitoshi didn't rush him. When Izuku finally managed a small blob of toothpaste on the bristles larger than Hitoshi's, but not by much, he looked up like he was silently asking if that was okay. "That's good," Hitoshi said softly, his smile unwavering. "Now we get the bristles a little wet." He guided Izuku's hand gently toward the running water, careful not to startle him. When the younger boy flinched at the water splashing against the sink, Hitoshi simply waited, giving Izuku time to adjust. "Just a little," Hitoshi murmured again, demonstrating with his own brush before nodding toward Izuku's. "There you go." Izuku followed the motion, dipping the bristles into the stream for just a second before pulling back. "Now," Hitoshi paused, shifting so Izuku could watch him in the mirror. "You put it in your mouth and brush like this." He opened his mouth and began brushing his teeth, exaggerating the motions without making it silly, just slow, deliberate circles along the front teeth. "Small circles," he mumbled around the toothbrush. "Not too hard. You don't want to hurt your gums." Izuku hesitated, watching him carefully in the reflection. After a beat, he mimicked the motion, stiff and awkward at first, his brush barely grazing his teeth. "Yeah, like that," Hitoshi encouraged, his voice still gentle. "A little more pressure like this." He pressed his own brush just a bit firmer against his teeth, showing Izuku the difference. "It's okay if you make a mess," he added, noticing how Izuku kept stopping to check the foam building up in his mouth, like he wasn't sure if that was supposed to happen. Izuku blinked at the toothpaste bubbles forming at the corner of his lips and shot Hitoshi a panicked look. "That's normal," Hitoshi assured him softly. "It's supposed to get foamy, it means it's working." After a long pause, Izuku slowly went back to brushing this time, his circles a little steadier. "Good," Hitoshi said, smiling around his own brush. "Now we do the sides like this." They worked through the motions together: front teeth, sides, back. Izuku flinched a bit when the bristles grazed his gums, but Hitoshi quickly reminded him, "Softer there, it's okay if it feels weird at first." When they finally finished, Hitoshi spit into the sink and rinsed his brush, then gestured for Izuku to do the same. Izuku stared at the foam in his mouth for a moment before leaning over the sink and spitting, missing slightly and splattering a bit onto the edge of the counter. His eyes went wide, the panic rising again. But before the fear could fully take hold, Hitoshi grabbed a washcloth and wiped the mess away without a word. No scolding, no reaction, just a quiet, calm motion. "That happens sometimes," Hitoshi said softly. "No big deal." Izuku blinked again, still clutching his blanket with one hand and his toothbrush with the other, but his breathing, though shaky, started to slow. And for the first time since stepping into the bathroom, his shoulders relaxed just a little. Izuku struggled to keep his eyes open, a small yawn slipping past his lips as Hitoshi gently dried his hair with a towel. His head kept dipping forward, too heavy for his neck to hold up, and Hitoshi had to steady him more than once. They had just finished washing up and were back in their room. Their discarded, dirty clothes lay crumpled on the bedroom floor, but Hitoshi didn't have the energy to care. Right now, getting Izuku dry and dressed was the priority. Everything else could wait. "Almost done," he murmured, the words more for himself than Izuku. His voice was soft, careful, because loud noises still made Izuku flinch. Pulling out a clean set of clothes, Hitoshi worked to get Izuku dressed, a harder task than it should have been. The kid wasn't cooperating, more interested in curling up on the floor than lifting his arms or stepping into his pants. His body sagged with exhaustion, and every movement felt sluggish, like sleep was dragging him down. For a brief moment, Hitoshi wondered if this was how it was supposed to be, if this was normal. If younger brothers were always this limp and unhelpful when they were tired. He didn't really know. He'd never had the chance to learn what normal looked like. Finally, after some quiet coaxing and a few muttered curses under his breath, Hitoshi managed to get Izuku into clean clothes. It wasn't perfect, the shirt was slightly crooked, and the pants were twisted at the waistband, but it would do. The moment he was done, Izuku dragged his blanket to the same familiar spot on the floor. Hitoshi watched as his brother slowly nested into the fabric, his small form curling inward, seeking comfort in the only way he seemed to know how. Hitoshi's chest ached. Not in a way he could explain, just a dull, familiar feeling that never really went away. This wasn't how it should be. Izuku shouldn't be making his bed on the floor, acting like the hard ground was safer than the bed just a few steps away. With a soft sigh, Hitoshi tugged on his own clothes, his hands moving on autopilot while his gaze lingered on Izuku. He didn't try to move him, not tonight. Hitoshi busied himself, picking up the dirty clothes they had and throwing them into the far corner of the room, out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't much, but it made the space feel a little less chaotic, a little more under control. His fingers lingered for a moment on a torn seam of Izuku's old shirt before he dropped it with the rest. Just another reminder of the life they'd come from. He glanced over at Izuku, already curled up with his blanket, the boy's breathing soft and steady, though his small body seemed too tense for someone supposedly asleep. Even now, even here, Izuku can't relax. Hitoshi laid down beside him, keeping just enough distance to give Izuku space, but close enough that he could grab him if something happened, if someone came. The room was quiet, but Hitoshi's mind wasn't. Would they really be safe here? Could he trust Shoyuta and Hisashi? They seemed kind, too kind, and that only made him more suspicious. No one was ever kind without wanting something. His gaze flickered to the door, left slightly ajar, another gesture of trust. But all he saw was a potential entry point for danger. He fought the urge to get up and check the locks again. Izuku shifted beside him, a soft noise escaping his lips, half a sigh, half a whimper. Hitoshi tensed, waiting, but Izuku didn't wake. His small hand clutched the edge of his blanket like a lifeline. Hitoshi stared at the ceiling, his own exhaustion clawing at him, but sleep felt like a risk. What if tonight was a trick? What if they woke up back in the lab, everything a cruel illusion? But then Izuku shifted closer, his head resting just a little too near Hitoshi's arm, seeking silent comfort even in sleep. Hitoshi let out a quiet breath. For now, this was enough. He'd stay awake a little longer just in case. Hisashi stretched his back with a groan, the satisfying pop of his spine doing little to ease the exhaustion weighing down his limbs. His glasses were pushed up onto his head like a makeshift headband, and his long hair, usually immaculate, was now bundled into a messy bun, the handiwork of Shuta's clumsy but well-meaning fingers. Just 2 days away from hero work and teaching, and the mountain of paperwork they'd returned to was absurd. Graded assignments, incident reports, and a dozen emails all blurred together into an endless task list. Hisashi had started strong, full of his usual energetic flair, but the longer he stared at his students' barely legible answers, the grumpier he became. Shoyuta, ever observant, finally put his foot down. "You need a nap," Shoyuta had said, voice firm but soft, already tugging Hisashi's arm to guide him upstairs. "I'm fine, Sho," Hisashi protested weakly, even by his standards, but Shoyuta simply gave him that look. The one that said there was no room for negotiation. "I'll wake you in a few hours," Shoyuta promised. Hisashi snorted at that. The last time Shoyuta promised to wake him, Hisashi had slept straight through 10 hours, only to find Shoyuta passed out beside him, snoring softly. Still, his body betrayed him. Hisashi had just made it upstairs, the promise of sleep tugging at him like a heavy weight, when something caught his eye, the soft glow spilling out from beneath the bathroom door. The light was still on. He paused, the tired haze lifting ever so slightly as a flicker of awareness settled over him. Slowly, Hisashi made his way to the bathroom, his bare feet quiet against the floor. His hand hesitated for a fraction of a second on the doorframe before he peeked inside. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't neat either. Damp towels lay in a small heap, abandoned in a corner. The mirror was still fogged over, faint streaks of water marking the glass where someone, probably Hitoshi, had wiped it down. A toothbrush rested at an odd angle in the sink, and the faint scent of soap still hung in the air. A lived-in mess. The kind that didn't belong to captives or test subjects, it belonged to kids who were, however hesitantly, starting to exist outside the sterile walls of a lab. Hisashi swallowed past the lump in his throat. They were getting used to being here. And somehow, that realization was both a relief and a heartache. Hisashi hesitated for a moment, the quiet hum of the house settling around him. The faint glow from the bathroom light painted soft shadows along the hallway, but his attention quickly shifted to the slightly open door of the boy's room. He pushed it open with care, the hinges giving a soft creak, and his heart ached at the sight that greeted him. Hitoshi was already asleep, his breathing slow, steady, but his posture was anything but relaxed. Even in sleep, his body seemed tense, one arm resting near Izuku like a silent promise to guard him. The younger boy had burrowed into his blanket on the floor, curled up in a small bundle of fabric and fragile comfort. Neither of them had touched the bed. The sight wasn't unexpected, but it still hurt. Hizashi's gaze softened, lingering on the way Izuku's tiny frame seemed even smaller in the oversized shirt he was now wearing. The clean clothes were a reminder that the boys had finally showered, a small but significant step, yet their choice to sleep on the floor spoke louder than anything else. They didn't trust the bed. Didn't trust the comfort. Didn't trust that it wouldn't be taken away. Hizashi swallowed the lump rising in his throat. His fingers twitched at his sides, the urge to gather both boys up and tuck them safely into the bed, battling with the knowledge that it wouldn't be welcomed. They weren't there yet. So instead, he grabbed the extra blanket from the foot of the bed and carefully unfolded it, moving as quietly as possible. He draped it over both of them, tucking it around Izuku's curled form and letting the other end settle over Hito's legs. It wasn't much, but it was something. Hizashi lingered a moment longer, his hand hovering just above Izuku's hair, an instinctive gesture to comfort, but he stopped himself before making contact. "Sleep tight, little listeners," he whispered softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the ache in his chest. He stepped back, letting the room remain as it was, two boys sleeping on the floor, a bed untouched, and a door left slightly ajar. And as Hizashi returned to his own room, he couldn't shake the quiet hope that, maybe one day, they'd trust the softness of a bed again. Izuku was the first to wake. The room, once bright with the soft golden light of morning, was now draped in the muted hues of dusk. Shadows stretched long across the floor, creeping into every corner as the sun dipped below the horizon. The shift from light to dark was subtle, too subtle, and it made Izuku's chest tighten with an unease he couldn't shake. His wide green eyes flickered around the room, cataloging everything like a silent ritual. It was a habit now, a lifeline, something he'd done back at the lab every time he opened his eyes. Surroundings. Memorize them. Understand what can hurt you. Window. Pillow. Blanket. Each object was named in his head, over and over again, like a quiet mantra meant to ground him. Next to him, Hitoshi lay motionless, his breathing slow and steady, though his hand was still half-curled into a loose fist, a subtle readiness even in sleep. Izuku watched him for a moment, noting the faint furrow of his brow, the way his brother's jaw stayed tight even in rest. Back at the lab, Hitoshi had rarely slept. Too afraid to close his eyes for long, afraid of what might happen if he wasn't awake to protect Izuku. Too guarded to turn his back to anyone. Too scared that a moment of vulnerability might cost them both. Izuku remembered how his brother would sit against the wall, his hand always resting lightly on Izuku's arm, a silent promise that he was there, that he wouldn't let anything happen. So now, as Hitoshi slept beside him, Izuku didn't move. He didn't wake him. His brother needed the rest needed to feel, even for a brief moment, that they were safe enough for this. Still wrapped in his blanket, Izuku carefully shifted, his small feet padding softly against the floor. The blanket dragged behind him like a cloak, a comforting weight he refused to part with. It was his, something he'd been given here, not taken or stolen. His gaze roamed the room again, his fingers twitching against the fabric of the blanket, until they landed on the door. It was open. Not fully, just a small gap, but enough for Izuku to see the faint glow of light from the hallway beyond. His heart thudded against his ribs, not in fear exactly, but in the way it always did when something felt unfamiliar. Doors in the lab were never left open. They slammed shut. But bolted. Not unless someone was coming, a doctor with a clipboard and cold hands, a guard with a sharp voice, or worse, his father. But this door. It wasn't like that. It hung ajar, silent and still, the gaps small yet glaring. There was no lock, no shadow creeping through, no heavy footsteps approaching. Just a quiet, steady beam of light slipping in from the hallway, soft, warm, and unthreatening. He could leave. If he wanted to, he could take one step forward, then another. No one would stop him. No alarms would blare. No voices would bark orders. The realization was almost too big, too foreign. Izuku's chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something harder to name. Was this a test? Was someone watching, waiting to see if he would step out? A part of him, the part conditioned by years inside the lab, screamed at him to stay put. Don't move. Don't break the rules, even if you don't know what they are. Don't give them a reason to punish you. But another part, smaller, quieter, wondered if this was something else entirely. A choice. The word felt strange in his head. Choices were things other people had, not him. And yet, his foot shifted forward, the tiniest movement, barely more than a twitch, but it felt monumental, like he was pressing against some invisible boundary that had always been there but was suddenly gone. The hem of his blanket dragged behind him as Izuku took one small step toward the hallway. Izuku instinctively winced as his bare feet met the cool floor beyond their room, bracing himself for the sharp blare of an alarm, the kind that would echo through sterile hallways and summon heavy footsteps and barking orders. But the alarms didn't come. No rapid stomping of boots, no clipped commands. Instead, there was only silence, too soft, too unfamiliar. The kind of quiet that felt more like a trap than a comfort. It made Izuku's muscles coil, ready for something to break the stillness. But nothing did. Slowly, cautiously, he moved one foot in front of the other, every step tentative. The floorboards beneath him groaned with each shift of weight, and the sound felt too loud in the hush of the hallway. Each creak made Izuku flinch, his heart racing, but his curiosity tugged him forward. His first stop was the bathroom door, now closed, unlike when he and Hitoshi had last used it. The memory of the warm towel and clean clothes Hitoshi had brought them surfaced for a brief moment, but Izuku pushed it aside. He crossed the hall, his eyes landing on another door, slightly ajar, the one beside their room. He remembered Hitoshi disappearing into it when they first arrived, returning with clothes and the blanket Izuku still clutched tightly around his shoulders. This must be where Hitoshi sleeps. Izuku didn't dare open it, his curiosity hadn't stretched that far yet. Instead, something else caught his attention. A faint sliver of light slipping through the gap at the top of the staircase. The soft murmur of voices floated up from downstairs, one low and steady, the other warmer, quieter. They were talking. Not like the guards or the doctors at the lab, whose words were clipped and clinical. Not like his father, harsh, demanding, unrelenting. But talking. Izuku lingered in the hall for a moment longer, his heart a soft thud in his chest. But curiosity, a quiet and insistent pull, slowly outweighed the fear knotting his stomach. He took a hesitant step toward the top of the stairs, then another, inching forward until the soft glow of light brushed against his toes. Izuku's breathing hitched, not from fear, not exactly. It was something else. Something tangled and unfamiliar. Another step. Then another. Slowly, the living room came into view. Shoyuta sat at the dining table, a loose stack of papers spread before him, the pages slightly crumpled at the edges. His head was bowed, dark hair falling into his face as his tired eyes skimmed the words in front of him. He didn't move sharply or speak suddenly, he just existed there, calm and still, the steady tap of his pen against the table the only sound he made. Hitoshi was on the couch, his legs folded beneath him, phone in hand. His thumb lazily scrolled through whatever was on the screen, but his other hand was tangled in his hair, still twisted into that messy bun, his fingers absent-mindedly tugging at loose strands as if he'd forgotten about it altogether. Every now and then, he huffed softly at something on his phone, a faint smile flickering across his face. It was so normal. No lab coats. No sterile walls. No cameras lurking in the corners, their silent lenses always watching. Just two adults in a quiet home, two people doing nothing at all. Izuku didn't know what to do with that. His heart beat faster, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he was seeing. He searched the room for something, anything that would explain the strangeness of it. A hidden threat, a trap waiting to spring. There had to be something. But there wasn't. It didn't add up. There was always something, always a trick, a hidden layer of danger, a cruel twist waiting just beneath the surface. But here? All he could see was the slow rhythm of an ordinary evening. The muted shuffle of papers. The absent tug of hair. The quiet exchange of words between two men who didn't seem to notice him, not like a threat, not like a target, but like he was just. It made no sense. And the more it didn't make sense, the harder his heart pounded. Hitoshi shifted slightly on the couch, the springs groaning beneath him, a sudden sound in the stillness. Izuku flinched. His body moved before his mind could catch up, his fingers tightening around the blanket, his feet sliding back a half-step toward the hall. Then Hitoshi spoke, not loud, not sharp, just soft and a little tired. "Hey Sho, remind me to fix that spring. Feels like it's about to give out." Shoyuta hummed in response, not looking up from his papers. "We've had that couch for years. It's always been like that." Hitoshi chuckled, not a cruel laugh, not mocking, just a quiet, easy sound. "Guess I'm just getting old." The air shifted. The tension in Izuku's shoulders didn't vanish, but it eased just a fraction. His foot, which had been halfway through retreating, hovered for a moment longer. Then, slowly he set it back down. Izuku didn't move forward again, not yet. But he didn't back away either. But then a sharp noise from outside. The slam of a car door. A dog barking in the distance. Izuku flinches again. Harder this time. His foot slips on the stair, the sudden creak of wood slicing through the quiet. And then smoke. It starts as a thin wisp, curling from his fingertips, but panic fuels it. The haze thickens, slipping down the stairs like a slow-moving fog, clinging to the banister, the walls, the air itself. His breath quickens too fast, too shallow, and the smoke pulses with it, like it's tied to the rhythm of his fear. Hitoshi reacts first, not with alarm, but with a soft, steady voice. "Izuku!" It's gentle. Not a question, not a command, just his name, spoken like a thread meant to tether him. Shoyuta doesn't move. Doesn't speak. He watches, calm and quiet, his presence a steady anchor rather than a looming shadow. He's letting Izuku decide to run, to hide, to stay. No pressure. No force. Waiting. The smoke shudders, swirling in place, but it doesn't spread further. Izuku's fingers claw tighter into the fabric of his blanket, the worn cloth bunched between his hands like it's the only thing keeping him from coming undone. Hide. Fight. The instincts crash into one another, tangled and chaotic. His body screams to move, to escape, but something else roots him in place. Something quieter. Something that doesn't make sense. Why aren't they angry? Why aren't they shouting? Why is Hitoshi still sitting there, signing soft words with careful hands? Why is Shoyuta still leaning against the table, unbothered by the smoke curling around his feet? Why does this feel so safe? The longing strikes him without warning, sharp and sudden and unbearable. It twists in his chest, unfamiliar and overwhelming. He doesn't understand it, this ache for something he can't name. This pull toward the steady warmth of a home that isn't his. It terrifies him. The smoke begins to thin, dissipating into the air. Izuku doesn't move. Not yet. But he doesn't run either. And Shoyuta and Hitoshi, they just wait. The smoke lingers, not as thick as before, but enough to blur the line between Izuku and the men below. Hitoshi moves first, slowly, carefully stepping toward the base of the stairs. But he doesn't come any closer. Instead, he lowers himself onto the last step, the creak of the wood soft beneath him. It's deliberate, no sudden movements, no looming presence. Just him, seated, smaller, less threatening. He raises a hand, fingers forming slow, careful shapes in the air. It's okay. The signs are simple, but they're steady, his hands gentle, patient. The kind of softness meant for a frightened creature, not out of pity, but respect. Izuku's wide eyes flicker between Hitoshi's hands and his face, his chest still heaving, but his feet don't move. Shoyuta stays where he is, back still against the table, making no effort to bridge the distance. But his gaze is there, watchful, steady. Not cold, not indifferent, just present. A silent promise that Izuku is in control of this moment. That nothing will happen unless he chooses it. Izuku's mind is a mess of instincts, but beneath the panic is something quieter. Something stranger. A longing. It's not a trap. It's not a cell. It's just a home. And Izuku doesn't know what to do with that. His breathing slows. The smoke thins, curling into wisps before finally dissipating into nothing. Izuku doesn't move closer, his feet stay rooted to the spot, but he doesn't run. Doesn't bolt up the stairs or slam the door behind him. It feels like something fragile has shifted. A tiny step, not forward, not yet, but no longer backward either. Hizashi's voice is almost a whisper. Come down if you want. That's it. No coaxing, no pleading, just an offer. A choice. Izuku lingers a moment longer, his fingers still twisting into the worn fabric of his blanket, and then, slowly, he backs away. Shuda's eyes remained fixed on the staircase long after the last wisp of smoke had faded into the air. His hand, still holding the pen, felt heavy against the cool surface of the dining table. His thumb absently ran along the edge, the soft ridges of the plastic a small anchor in the sudden tide of doubt that washed over him. For a moment, his heart sank just a bit as he replayed the scene in his mind. Izuku, standing on the stairs, small and wide-eyed, his blanket clutched in trembling hands. The way his body had moved, not toward them but away, each step a retreat back into the shadows. It was a kind of quiet heartbreak, the kind that whispered beneath the surface of his thoughts. And it wasn't the fear itself that unraveled him, it was what it meant. The unspoken truth that maybe, despite everything, Izuku still wasn't sure if they were safe. Shoyuta had hoped maybe too soon, maybe too much, that things were changing. He'd let himself believe that Hitoshi stopping him from closing the door meant something. That it was a sign, however. Small, that the boys were beginning to trust them. That the unspoken space between them was beginning to close. But now that tiny hope felt fragile, a thread worn thin by the weight of his own expectations. And the doubt settled in, soft but persistent. It wasn't that he didn't think he could handle this, he was more than willing to try, to be patient, to take whatever steps were needed. He had braced himself for the long road ahead, for the sleepless nights and the quiet fears. But there was a voice in the back of his mind, quiet and cold, that whispered maybe he was getting ahead of himself. Maybe his hope had been misplaced. Maybe the boys needed more than he could give. Maybe he wasn't enough. But then his gaze shifted. Hisashi had moved to the bottom of the stairs, his posture relaxed, a gentle curve to his lips that spoke not of loss but of hope. His green eyes were warm, soft in the dim light as he sat down on the last step, his hands open and inviting, not demanding. He wasn't looking at the empty space where Izuku had stood, but at the stairs themselves, at the place where small feet had lingered, where a boy had made the choice to step out of his safe zone on his own. Hisashi didn't see withdrawal. He saw progress. He got out of the room. Hisashi's voice was barely above a whisper, but it reached him all the same. On his own. He got out. And with those words, the lens through which Shoyuta had been seeing the scene shifted. His perspective turned, not to what had been lost in the retreat, but what had been gained in the first step forward. Izuku had made it to the hallway. He had come out without prompting, without being led. His curiosity, however faint, had outweighed his fear, even if only for a moment. That was bravery. Quiet, hesitant, but bravery all the same. And suddenly, Shuda's doubts weren't so loud. The voice that had whispered of failure fell silent, replaced by the gentle hum of a new understanding. This wasn't about leaps and bounds, it was about inches. About every small step being a triumph, every hesitant glance being a victory. It was about meeting the boys where they were, not where he hoped they might be. Hisashi's expression held steady, a soft pride, a patience that wrapped around Shuda's own fears and quieted them. Because Hisashi had always seen what Shoyuta sometimes struggled to grasp, that healing was not a straight line. That hope wasn't a promise of quick success but a commitment to every tiny movement forward. And for the first time since the smoke had curled around the banister, Shoyuta let himself breathe. His grip on the pen eased, his shoulders lost a fraction of their tension. He didn't let go of his hopes, he simply reshaped them, softer now, more pliable. Less a demand and more an invitation. Heart thumping against his ribs as he ran back to the room, leaving the door as it were to make it look like he never left, that his venture outside the hallway did not happen before he lied back next to Hitoshi, His fists gripping his blanket tight from the tension he felt as he tried his best to stay still, waiting for the older men to come in the room, to follow him inside and punish him. But they never came. Hitoshi, even in his sleeping form, felt the tension Izuku practically radiated that stirred him awake. His guard immediately raised and expected danger as he opened his eyes but was met with confusion when he saw none, just Izuku staring at the half-open door of their room as if it had offended him. Hitoshi didn't speak. He knew that talking, regardless of how soft he delivers it, would spook Izuku further and that could set one or both of his quirks off. So instead, he reached for Izuku's blanket and gave it a light tug. Just enough to catch the younger boy's attention enough to tear his wide eyes from the door and to Hitoshi. Hitoshi's hand hovered in front of him and asked, "What's wrong?" But Izuku didn't answer. Instead he clutched his blanket closer to his body in an attempt to make himself small. Hitoshi glanced at the half-open door, then back at Izuku before asking again. "Bad dream?" Izuku had plenty of those. Hitoshi would often be woken up by it. May it be a simple sniffle as Izuku cries in his sleep from the nightmare, or chaotic as his quirk would be activated at how bad his nightmares were. But this time, Izuku shook his head. "Then what's wrong?" Hitoshi waited for Izuku for him to stop looking at the door as if waiting for something or someone to barge in, for him to stop trembling and gripping the blanket's already stretched fabrics in his small hands, for him to finally look at Hitoshi and tell him what's wrong. Izuku signed hesitantly, unshed tears glistening against the faint light from the open door of their room. "I got out." Hitoshi waited for his brother to continue what he meant, but Izuku placed his hands back to his blanket, offering Hitoshi just 3 words. "I got out." Hitoshi looked at him confused. What did that mean? Izuku got out? What? Of the lab? Was that it? Was he finally realizing that he and Hitoshi were free of the lab days after they actually got out? If so, why was Izuku looking at the door? If he knew that he was already out of the lab, why would he feel cornered at the sight of the open door? Hitoshi tugged at Izuku's blanket again, catching the younger boy's attention once more. "We're not at the lab anymore. We have been out of the lab for days. We're not there anymore. We got out." But Izuku shook his head, and Hitoshi wondered if that meant that Izuku disagreed with him until Izuku signed. "I got out to the hallway." Hitoshi froze, his eyes widening in shock. He hadn't expected Izuku to venture out on his own, not when he had clung to him earlier, flinching at every creak of the floor as they made their way to the bathroom, not when he would wedge himself between the wall and the closet every time Hisashi and Shoyuta entered the room, not when any sudden movement or noise could trigger Black Whip or Smokescreen within seconds. But then, Hitoshi realized something. Izuku, by nature, was a curious boy. Despite everything he had endured, that curiosity had never truly disappeared. It had only been buried, and now, little by little, it was starting to resurface. Yet, the cruel conditioning they had both suffered left its mark. Izuku wasn't just curious, he was afraid of what his actions might cost. He was waiting for the adults to come to punish him, to punish Hitoshi for letting him step out, to hurt them. The realization broke Hitoshi's heart. Izuku thought that was normal. Gently, Hitoshi reached for Izuku's trembling hands. The faint trace of Smokescreen faded the moment Hitoshi's fingers curled around his, and he offered a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay. You're not going to get hurt. No one will be mad. No one will hurt you." Izuku's uncertain gaze met his own. "You're not mad?" The question caught Hitoshi off guard, but he quickly shook his head. "Never at you." And for a fleeting moment, Izuku's tense shoulders eased. They didn't speak about what Izuku had done or where he had gone. Hitoshi knew Izuku would tell him when he was ready. For now, the quiet progress of Izuku standing behind him, half hidden but still present as Hisashi and Shoyuta brought them dinner, was more than enough. The days slipped by in quiet increments. At first, the routine was subtle, so subtle that it didn't feel like a routine at all. Shoyuta would knock softly on the door at mealtimes, a gentle, consistent rhythm against the wood. No commands, no demands, just a steady signal, the same every time. A quiet offer, not an order. The gap at the door never closed, but it did not open either. The boys no longer insisted the food be left on the floor, allowing Shoyuta or Hisashi to place it on the desk instead. A quiet shift. And perhaps the most telling sign of progress, Izuku no longer hid in his safe space between the wall and the closet. He stood behind Hitoshi now, clutching the hem of his brother's shirt in one hand and his blanket in the other, peeking out with wary yet curious eyes. But by the end of the week, the door cracked open. Just an inch. Hisashi noticed first, his heart twisting at the sight, not in sadness, but in something softer. Something hopeful. It was the smallest of changes, but change nonetheless. 2 weeks more and the door stayed open just wide enough to catch a glimpse of Hitoshi's wary gaze or Izuku's nervous fidgeting. They never stepped through the threshold, but they were there watching, listening. Progress. Hitoshi was still guarded, his violet eyes sharp with suspicion at every small movement Shoyuta and Hisashi made. He waited for the catch, the hidden consequence, the moment when the soft voices and patient gestures would twist into something cruel. But it never came. Instead, Shoyuta would simply knock, leave their food, and retreat without a word. Hisashi would hum quietly from the couch downstairs, scrolling through his phone, never once pushing them to come out. No tricks. No traps. It didn't make sense. Hitoshi hated how much it didn't make sense. Softness wasn't supposed to last. Kindness always came with a price. Back in the lab, every gesture of gentleness was a lure, a hook hidden beneath a calm voice or a careful hand. A pat on the head before a needle in the arm. A soft word before a harsh command. Praise before pain. But here in this strange, quiet house there was nothing to brace for. No sudden shift. No cruel twist. Just patience. It gnawed at Hitoshi's mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment Shuta's steady knock would turn into a pounding fist, or Hisashi's gentle hum would snap into a shout. But it never happened. And somehow, that was worse. Because it meant Hitoshi didn't know what to do. A picnic? Hitoshi asked. Izuku's eyes darted between his brother and the blond man who had suggested it. Hisashi stood by the doorway, the gentle smile ever so present, as he waited for Hitoshi to give a nod or an approval. Just out here in the hallway, Hisashi added. Thought it might be a way to share a meal together without crossing any lines. His voice remained light, nonchalant, like it wasn't a big deal. But the hope behind his words was clear. There was no pressure, no insistence, just an idea gently placed at their feet, free to be picked up or left behind. Hitoshi's eyes narrowed as he studied Hisashi's face, searching for the hidden angle, the trap tucked beneath the offer. There had to be one, there always was. But Hisashi didn't say anything else. Hitoshi glanced at Izuku, a silent question in his gaze as he looked back at his brother. Izuku blinked at him, confusion scrunching his nose. His tiny fingers curled into his blanket, his silence speaking louder than any words could. He didn't know what a picnic was. The decision was up to Hitoshi. Okay, he simply said, followed by a smile from Hisashi, a smile bigger than what he intended but still a warm one, as he gave a nod before retreating downstairs. Hitoshi turned to their own tray of food that had been placed at their desk before the conversation started. As he grabbed the bowls, Izuku took it as a sign to sit down on their usual spot while Hitoshi laid out the bowls that contained their dinner. Then the soft footsteps came again, catching Izuku's attention, and he saw Hisashi again, holding a tray of his own. Shoyuta was a few steps behind him, his own plate in hand. Izuku looked up at Hitoshi in confusion and curiosity as the adults settled out the hallway. Picnic. Hitoshi gestured at their food and at the adults, one hand mimicking holding a plate while the other pretended to scoop food, a silent offer paired with his soft-spoken words. Confusion further set in as Izuku looked down at their food, then at Hisashi and Shoyuta, who sat on the floor from across the room. Not dinner. Izuku learned what dinner was the first time Hisashi brought them food. According to Hitoshi, if the food comes in when it's dark outside, it is called dinner. It was different from breakfast, where the food comes in after they woke up, and lunch when the sky outside is bright. It still is, Zuku, Hitoshi answered, pulling his plate closer to himself. Izuku's fingers twitched at his side, his wide green eyes darting from the plates on the floor to Hisashi's soft smile. His confusion was clear, the slight furrow of his brow, the way he edged just a bit closer to Hitoshi without even realizing it. Hitoshi noticed. Of course he did. It's like dinner, Hitoshi said as he signed, his fingers precise but simple. But on the floor. Not the table. Izuku blinked, his gaze flickering between Hitoshi's hands and the plates on the hallway floor. He didn't sign back, didn't move, really, but his fingers tightened ever so slightly in the fabric of Hitoshi's sleeve. It's the same food, Hitoshi added after a beat, his voice quiet but steady. Just somewhere else. The words felt clumsy, but it was the best way he knew how to explain. Izuku didn't look fully convinced. But after a long pause, he gave the smallest of nods, a silent, hesitant agreement. They ate in silence, two boys inside the room, two men just beyond the doorway. At one point, Shoyuta noticed something, a small, quiet struggle. Izuku, his brows furrowed, clumsily tried to use his chopsticks, his fingers fumbling over the unfamiliar task. His frustration was clear, his lips pressed into a thin line as his food slipped from the utensils again and again. Hitoshi, without a word, shifted closer to Izuku, his hands subtly guiding the younger boy's fingers. He didn't speak, didn't scold, just gently corrected Izuku's grip and showed him how to move the chopsticks. Izuku's movements were slow, a bit messy, but with Hitoshi's patient help, he managed to bring a piece of food to his mouth. A small victory. From the hallway, Hizashi's heart ached at the sight, at the care in Hitoshi's touch, at the fierce concentration on Izuku's face. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth. But it was something. And then, when the meal was done and the plates were empty, Shoyuta and Hizashi started gathering them up, ready to retreat once again, when a slight movement caught their attention. Izuku. He stood at the corner of the room, half hidden behind Hitoshi's shoulder, his blanket still clutched tightly in one hand. His green eyes flickered between the adults and the empty plates, his fingers twitching, uncertain, hesitant. For a moment, it seemed like that was all. Just a glance. Just a heartbeat. But then slowly, carefully, Izuku raised his free hand. Thumb touching his chin, his fingers moved forward in a simple, practiced motion. Thank you. Just 2 words. Just one small sign. Yet it hung in the air like a fragile thread, a delicate bridge spanning the silent space between them. Hizashi's breath caught, not loudly, but just enough for Shoyuta to notice. It wasn't much. It wasn't everything. But it was something. And when Izuku's hand fell back to his side, his gaze darted back down to the floor, his blanket twisting slightly in his grip. The quiet weight of that moment remained. Shoyuta didn't speak. Hizashi didn't push. Instead, they simply nodded, soft, steady, acknowledging the silent thanks without crowding it. And then the door closed once more. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Later that night, the quiet of their room wrapped around them like a thin veil. Izuku stirred in his sleep, clutching his blanket close as he lay curled in his usual spot on the floor. Hitoshi sat beside him, his arms wrapped around his knees, wide awake, his mind a tangle of thoughts, each one louder than the last. He thought about the exchange they'd had earlier with the adults, the quiet suggestion of a picnic, the way Hizashi had explained it without pushing, the silent meal they'd shared on either side of the doorway. It was strange, too soft, too easy. There was no catch. No punishment waiting in the wings. Just a simple dinner, a simple moment. And then he thought about the days before that, the soft knocks at mealtimes, the steady patience, the careful distance Shoyuta and Hizashi kept. No commands. No tricks. No sudden shifts into something cruel. Hitoshi's mind raced, running over each interaction like a thread he was desperate to unravel, tugging at the seams, searching for the hidden hook, the trap. Because there had to be one. There was always a catch. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. But nothing came to mind. No harsh words masked behind soft ones. No consequences hidden beneath their kindness. No sudden snap of cruelty once their guard was down. Just steady, unrelenting patience. And it frustrated him, gnawed at the edges of his thoughts like an itch he couldn't scratch. Because if there was no trick, then what did that mean? What were they supposed to do with kindness that didn't ask for anything in return? His thoughts were cut off when he heard a quiet shuffle from outside the hallway. Already knowing that crossing the threshold of their door was safe, Hitoshi did not hesitate to stand up and check what it was, just to be safe. Hitoshi peeked through the halls to see that the door that led to Hizashi and Shuta's room remained open. Shoyuta had his back turned against Hitoshi as he seemed to talk to someone on the phone. "It's not forever, Nizu," Shoyuta said, his voice calm but firm. "Just until they're settled." The person on the other line's response was muffled, but the tone was unmistakably light-hearted, almost teasing. Then Shoyuta huffed softly, the closest thing to a laugh Hitoshi had heard from him. "More time off," Shoyuta muttered, clearly responding to whatever the person had said. "You're not giving me a vacation. You're threatening me with one." There was another quiet exchange, then the soft click of Shoyuta hanging up before he turned to leave the room, only to freeze when he spotted Hitoshi. "I'm sorry," Shoyuta said slowly, gently. "Did I wake you? I'll remember to close the door next time." Hitoshi didn't give out a response even as Shoyuta moved to go downstairs and finish whatever paperworks were left on the table for him. "Why?" Shoyuta paused mid-step on the stairs, turning to face him. "Why what?" Hitoshi's throat worked, but the question clawed its way out anyway. "Why are you doing this? Why did you take us in?" His voice cracked slightly at the end, and he hated himself for it. Because no one ever cared like this. Not the doctors. Not the guards. Not even his own father. So why did they? Shuta's expression remained neutral, but his voice, steady and calm, held a warmth Hitoshi didn't know what to do with. "Because you needed someone." Simple. No strings attached. No hidden motive. Just because. Hitoshi's vision blurred, his chest tightening with something too big to hold back. He blinked rapidly, willing the sting in his eyes to go away to hide the overwhelming wave of emotion threatening to spill over. "That's stupid," he muttered, his voice thin and unconvincing. We're not your problem." Shoyuta offered him a soft, lopsided grin, tired but kind. "You're not a problem, Hitoshi." The lump in Hitoshi's throat grew heavier, and without another word he spun on his heel and disappeared back into the guest room. But his words clung to Hitoshi long after the door closed behind him. The incoming storm was announced a few days earlier before it hit. At the time, neither Hizashi nor Shoyuta paid any mind to the announcement of the storm hitting days later. They didn't pay any attention to how cloudy the sky was that very morning and how it remained that way the whole day. Then nighttime came, and the storm rolled in without warning. The rain began as a soft drizzle, tapping against the windows like distant footsteps, unassuming at first. But the wind picked up, howling through the eaves, and the drizzle grew into a steady downpour. The air seemed heavier, charged with something electric. And then, the sky cracked open. A bolt of lightning split through the dark, followed by a violent crash of thunder that rattled the windows. "Izuku!" The cry wasn't loud, but it was sharp, panicked, and it cut through the night like a blade. Shoyuta sat bolt upright, his sleep severed instantly at the sound of the voice coming from down the hall. His mind, sluggish with sleep only seconds before, snapped into focus as his sharp eyes registered the haze creeping along the floor of their bedroom. Smoke. But not from a fire. "Sheet," he muttered under his breath, already moving. Hizashi, woken just as suddenly, was a step ahead, throwing open their bedroom door. What greeted them was a wall of thick, rolling smoke, curling out from the slightly ajar door of the kids' room. The smell wasn't acrid, it didn't sting like something burning, but it was dense, cloying. Izuku's smokescreen. Hitoshi stood at the hall, his shoulder to the doorframe, his free hand waving the smoke from his face as he coughed. His violet eyes, wide with urgency, darted to them immediately. I can't get him to hear me," Hitoshi rasped, his voice tight with worry and smoke. "He won't stop, he's not listening." Shuta's gaze shifted to the small figure in the middle of the room. Izuku. He was curled in on himself in the corner of the room, knees drawn up, his small hands clamped over his ears. His eyes, wild and unseeing, were locked on something far away, something not in this room, not in this house. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, each inhale more desperate than the last. The panic had him. It clung to him like a vice, dragging him further down with every passing second. The smoke screen thickened, rolling in waves across the floor and rising higher by the moment. It swirled in the air, filling the room, seeping into the hallway. "Zuku," Hitoshi tried again, softer now, but there was a thread of fear in his voice. Please, you're okay, it's just a storm. Just thunder. But Izuku didn't hear him. His quirk wasn't a controlled thing, not like this. It was a reflex, a scream of fear manifesting in the only way his body knew how. Every crack of thunder outside sent another pulse of smoke billowing into the room. Seeing that they couldn't reach Izuku, Shura's jaw tightened slightly before his eyes softened. With a practiced blink, his quirk erasure activated. The rolling smoke thinned almost instantly, smoke screens snuffed out as Izuku's quirk was silenced. The risk of Black Whip surging forward, wild and uncontrolled, was too great to ignore. The air was clearer now, but Izuku's panic remained, his breathing still too fast, too shallow. Hisashi met Shura's gaze, a silent exchange passing between them. Then, cautiously, Hisashi stepped into the room, not rushing, not reaching, just moving slow, steady. He stopped a few feet from where Izuku was, lowering himself to the floor. Kneeling. Grounded. One hand extended not to touch, but to offer. Another flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a sharp crack of thunder. Izuku flinched, his body jerking at the sound, and Hitoshi stiffened beside the door. Hisashi didn't waver. Instead, he started humming a soft, rhythmic lullaby, a simple melody, one that didn't fight the storm's noise but cut through it like a calm current. Hitoshi's breathing slowed, unconsciously syncing with Hisashi's hum. His hand, still pressed against the doorframe, loosened its grip. Izuku's fingers twitched, still curled against his ears, but his ragged breathing began to shift, the gasps less frantic. And the room, though still clouded with lingering smoke, felt just a bit lighter. A small, delicate step out of the panic. Shoyuta didn't move. Hisashi didn't stop humming. Slowly, hesitantly, Izuku's gaze flickered, darting to the hand Hisashi had extended. His small fingers uncurled, trembling, reaching but not quite closing the distance. Another breath. Another shudder. Izuku's hand, small and shaking, hovered for a heartbeat too long, a silent war waging within him before it finally landed in Hisashi's open palm. His fingers barely curled around the blonde's, more a whisper of a grip than anything solid, but it was there. Hisashi didn't move, didn't tighten his hold, just let Izuku control the contact. And then, like a thread pulled too tight at last giving way, Izuku moved. He crawled forward, slow and unsteady, his wide green eyes still shimmering with the remnants of panic. Every flash of lightning made him flinch, but he didn't let go of Hisashi's hand. When he reached him, Izuku folded in on himself again, but this time, against the solid, warm presence in front of him. Hisashi kept humming, his voice steady even as his free hand hovered just above Izuku's back, unsure whether to comfort or stay still. The boy was trembling, a constant, bone-deep shake, but he was there, leaning into Hisashi's chest, his face hidden against the soft fabric of his shirt. Caught off guard, Hisashi blinked, his heart stuttering for a moment before his gaze flicked to Shoyuta. Shoyuta, ever the pillar of calm, didn't speak, though something shifted in his usually neutral expression. A quiet relief. A fragile hope. But it was Hitoshi who drew Hisashi's attention next. The older boy was still by the door, his jaw tight, his violet eyes wide, not with fear this time, but something close to surprise. Hisashi watched as Hitoshi's expression softened, his lips parting slightly before he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent approval. Hisashi could be the anchor tonight. So he adjusted his position slowly, cradling Izuku without caging him in, and kept humming that soft, simple tune, a lullaby against the storm's fury. And little by little, Izuku's breathing began to match the rhythm. Izuku had fallen asleep, curled up against Hisashi, after he calmed down. Hitoshi, unwilling to leave Izuku's side for too long, hesitantly curled up next to the blonde, his hand resting on Izuku's lap to keep himself grounded before finding slumber. Hisashi sat there silently as the kid's erratic breaths started to calm down. Shoyuta stood across the room watching his husband be their pillar of calm. Tonight. Minutes passed, maybe hours, before the silence truly settled. The only sounds left were the occasional patter of rain against the windows and the soft, steady inhales and exhales of the two boys clinging to Hisashi. Shura's voice, quiet and low, broke the silence. You should get some sleep too. Hisashi didn't lift his head, his fingers gently running through Izuku's messy curls. I'm fine, he replied softly. They need someone here when they wake up. They'll be fine. I'm staying. Hisashi finally looked up at him, his smile small but resolute. Yeah, I know. But it's different if I'm the one they see first. Shoyuta didn't argue. He knew Hisashi was right, knew that Izuku, still skittish and prone to panic, responded better to the gentler, softer presence Hisashi offered. It wasn't that Shoyuta didn't care, he did, more than anything, but his quiet intensity wasn't always what the kids needed. Especially not tonight. Then I'll stay too, Shoyuta said, leaning back against the wall, arms crossed but his posture loose, relaxed. Hisashi chuckled softly. You need rest, Sho. So do you. Their words hung in the air, neither of them pushing harder than necessary. It wasn't a fight, it never was, but a quiet negotiation born from shared exhaustion and shared love. Finally, Hisashi gave a small nod. I'll stay with them, he said, his voice a whisper, careful not to disturb the boys. You can keep watch from there. Shoyuta exhaled, a sound less like a sigh and more like reluctant acceptance. Fine. The storm outside had long passed, leaving only the faintest echo of wind against the house. Inside, the four of them remained, Izuku tucked into Hisashi's side, Hitoshi's hands still resting protectively over his brother's lap, and Shoyuta across the room. No words were spoken after that. Just the quiet rise and fall of steady breathing. And in the calm that followed, their little family drifted off through the night. The morning after the storm, the house was silent. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft and warm, casting golden streaks across the bedroom floor. Hisashi stirred slightly, his back against the wall, Izuku still curled up beside him, his breathing slow and steady. For a moment, Izuku's eyes fluttered open, bleary, confused. Realizing how close he was to someone, his body tensed, but Hisashi, noticing the shift, remained still, feigning sleep. No sudden movements. No words. Izuku's breathing hitched, his gaze flickering to the door, but after a long pause, he carefully, silently shifted away, crawling to Hitoshi and burying his face in his older brother's chest. Hitoshi stirred, a protective arm instinctively wrapping around Izuku. Hisashi stayed put, unsure whether to move, watching the kids as their breathing evened out again. The soft creak of the door broke the silence, and Hisashi glanced up to see Shoyuta peeking into the room. Hisashi offered a tired, warm smile before his gaze returned to the sleeping boys. I made coffee, Shoyuta said quietly, a gentle invitation. Hisashi took the cue, slowly standing and slipping out of the room, but not before sparing a final glance at the small, tangled bundle of limbs on the floor. Izuku's eyes, half-lidded with sleep, met Hisashi's. After a brief hesitation, the boy offered a shy, quiet sign. Thank you. As the adults exited the room, Izuku laid there, trying to reel everything in. His hands subconsciously reached for his blanket that he had dropped last night as he tried to drown the sounds of the storm before pulling it against his body, a protective and familiar comfort. It had been over 3 weeks since they'd come to live with Hisashi and Shoyuta. The days had bled together, a blur of soft voices and cautious glances, of 2 large rooms and 2 quiet halls. But the nights were the hardest. Even after the storm, Izuku refused to sleep on the bed. Hitoshi hadn't pushed. He simply curled up on the floor with Izuku, offering the silent comfort of his presence. Every night after that, the pattern repeated. Hisashi had brought in extra blankets and pillows without a word, and Shoyuta never asked why the bed remained untouched. But tonight Hitoshi noticed the way Izuku kept shifting, how he curled tighter against the wall, fingers twitching at the hem of his shirt. The floor wasn't comfortable, it never was, but Izuku still refused to move. They had just taken a bath and Hitoshi had just finished dressing Izuku when he noticed his brother's discomfort as he nested at his usual spot on the floor. Zuku, Hitoshi murmured, voice low enough not to echo. You can sleep on the bed, you know. It's okay. Izuku's shoulders tensed at the words. He shook his head sharply, not looking up, his hand still twisting the fabric of his shirt. It's not a trick, Hitoshi said softly, reading the fear in Izuku's stiff posture. No one's gonna punish you for using it. It's your bed. Our bed. Izuku's fingers stilled. His wide green eyes darted to Hitoshi, hesitant. I know what it's like, Hitoshi continued, his voice barely above a whisper. When you're not used to having something and you're scared it'll get taken away. Or that you'll get hurt for wanting it. Izuku swallowed, his breathing uneven. But this isn't like that, Hitoshi said. It's not like the lab. No one's watching you, waiting for you to mess up. A moment of silence. But Izuku's eyes darted a little too long to the bed before they went back to Hitoshi, asking a silent question. Safe. Don't worry, Hitoshi said, I'll stay with you. We can both use the bed. No one's gonna say anything. For a long, aching moment, Izuku didn't move. But then, cautiously, he unfolded himself from the floor. Each movement was careful, measured, as though he expected the bed to vanish the moment he touched it. His fingers skimmed the comforter first, and when nothing happened, when no alarms blared, no hands grabbed him, he finally climbed onto the mattress. He didn't lie down at first. He simply sat, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the door like he was waiting for someone to appear. See? Hitoshi whispered. It's just a bed. That's all. Izuku blinked slowly, his breathing still shaky. Minutes passed in silence before, at last, Izuku uncurled slightly, his head resting on the pillow. His body remained tense, but the smallest bit of comfort had rooted itself there, tentative but real. Hitoshi settled beside him, not too close, but not too far either. But Izuku was on the move as he crawled closer to Hitoshi, his hand finding and gripping his shirt as he rested his head on Hitoshi's chest, listening to his brother's steady heartbeat, the action grounding him, reminding Izuku that Hitoshi was there to keep him safe like always. Hitoshi's fingers gently threaded through Izuku's curls, the soft motion steadying both of them. As Izuku's breathing evened out, Hitoshi's arm instinctively draped over his brother's small frame, a quiet, protective presence before sleep finally pulled him under. The door cracked open just a sliver, and Hisashi peeked inside, careful not to make a sound. His heart caught in his throat at the sight before him. Izuku, finally on the bed, his small frame curled beside Hitoshi, both boys breathing in quiet tandem. Hisashi's lips parted in a soft, silent smile, not wide and loud like usual, but something gentler, something warmer. His hand rested lightly on the doorframe, a silent moment of awe and relief washing over him. He didn't dare move closer, afraid of disturbing the delicate peace that had settled over the room. Instead, he lingered there, his heart full as he watched them. Then, with a quiet exhale, he pulled the door closed just enough to let the moonlight in a protective sliver of light and stepped away. Tonight, they slept on the bed. And that was everything. Hitoshi sighed at the small, unmoving lump under the covers of the bed. The soft rise and fall of the blanket told him Izuku wasn't asleep, just stubborn. Zuku, Hitoshi tried again, keeping his voice soft but firm. Come on out. The lump didn't budge. Hitoshi rubbed a tired hand over his face, his brain already cycling through every trick he'd used before promising food, offering to sit with him in the tub, even mentioning that Shoyuta and Hisashi would worry if they didn't see him soon. But nothing seemed to work today. After receiving the comfort that the bed offered last night, Izuku had refused to get down from it. Not for breakfast when Hisashi brought them in, not even after that, where he remained in his position, seated on the right side of the bed, the mattress warm from him, either lying down or sitting on it for almost his whole day. Hitoshi let him be, at first going around the room and making himself busy by tidying up, sorting his and Izuku's clothes so that it would be easier to pull them out when needed, but he never removed any of them, even if some fitted too big or too small for Izuku and him. But as the day passed, Hitoshi knew Izuku would have to get out of bed eventually. You have to take a bath, he said, shifting his tone just a little, more coaxing than commanding. Baths had become Izuku's favorite part of their daily routine, one of the only things that seemed to bring a spark of curiosity into his otherwise cautious world, and yet, even that wasn't enough to pull him out of bed this time. Hitoshi knelt beside the bed, his voice quieter now. Tell you what, he said, tapping his fingers lightly against the edge of the mattress. I'll let you open the faucet this time. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the lump stirred. A small head peeked out from under the blanket, curls flattened to one side from where Izuku had been pressed against the pillow. His wide green eyes searched Hitoshi's face wary, uncertain as if trying to figure out whether this was a trick. Hitoshi fought the small smile threatening to creep up his lips. "You like that, bud?" Izuku's gaze darted to the floor, then back to Hitoshi, and after a hesitant moment he gave a meek nod. "Come on out then." Slowly, cautiously, Izuku slid out from beneath the blanket, his small feet padding softly against the floor. He stayed close to the bed's edge as though half expecting a trap, but when nothing happened he stepped fully into view. Hitoshi waited by the threshold, letting Izuku set the pace. It was a routine. They were slowly, painfully building a silent negotiation between trust and fear. And today, the promise of opening the faucet was enough. Without a word, Hitoshi took Izuku's hand, small, cold fingers slipping into his own, and guided him down the hall to the bathroom. Their steps were a little faster than they'd been in those first few days, a quiet sign that Izuku was beginning to familiarize himself with their small world. As promised, when they reached the bathroom, Hitoshi lifted Izuku just high enough so he could grasp the faucet handle. With a small twist, water spilled into the tub, and Izuku watched it with silent fascination. It was a normal thing, the faucet, but to Izuku, it was like a quiet kind of magic. His fingers hovered beneath the running stream, catching stray droplets and watching them slip away, again and again, as if trying to understand it, how the water moved, why it disappeared. Sometimes, he'd cup his hands, letting the water pool just long enough to see it leak through the cracks between his fingers. It was a puzzle, one he couldn't quite solve, but was determined to figure out. Hitoshi didn't rush him. He sat on the edge of the tub, towel within reach, keeping a watchful eye while Izuku got lost in the steady motion of the water. The quiet moments would have been almost peaceful if not for the gnawing worry that never left Hitoshi's chest. It was hard not to think about the lab, about the sterile walls and cruel hands that taught Izuku to fear so much. Hitoshi wanted to believe what Shoyuta said, that they were safe now, but the risks were too high. Trust wasn't something he could afford easily, and the last thing he wanted was to witness Izuku's torment all over again. When the water reached the right height, Hitoshi carefully turned off the faucet, and Izuku didn't flinch at the sudden silence. Another small win. The tub was big enough for both of them, something that made these baths easier. It kept Izuku from feeling too exposed, too alone, and it stopped Hitoshi from getting completely soaked in the process. The scent of lavender filled the air as Hitoshi worked the shampoo into Izuku's hair, careful not to move too fast or pull too hard. The younger boy stayed still, his head tilted slightly forward, allowing Hitoshi to wash his hair without protest. It was one of the few moments Izuku seemed truly at ease. They settled into the familiar routine, with Hitoshi gently scrubbing shampoo into Izuku's hair. It was quiet, the only sounds being the slosh of water and Izuku's soft breathing. Until, suddenly, Izuku paused. He gathered some of the foamy lather from his hair, his head tilting as if inspecting it. Before Hitoshi could register what was happening, Izuku stuck out his tongue and gave the lather a cautious lick. "Hey." Hitoshi caught his wrist gently but firmly, pulling his hand away from his mouth. "That's not, you can't eat that, you know." Izuku blinked up at him, startled but curious, his nose scrunching at the bitter taste that lingered on his tongue. It wasn't fear, not this time, but a quiet confusion. Like he wasn't entirely sure what was safe or not. Hitoshi's chest ached. How many times, back in the lab, had Izuku been forced to taste something to test if it was safe? How many times had there been no explanation, only orders and punishments? "It's not food," Hitoshi added, softer this time. There was a beat of silence, then a small, almost sheepish nod from Izuku. He rubbed his hand along the side of the tub to get rid of the foam, his gaze flickering to Hitoshi for just a moment, as though checking for approval. Hitoshi huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You're a handful, you know that?" And just like that, they fell back into their silent rhythm, Izuku watching the water slip through his fingers, and Hitoshi watching Izuku, both caught somewhere between the weight of the past and the quiet hope of what could be. Shoyuta stood by the living room, his hand placed in the pocket of his sweatpants while the other held his phone against his ear as he talked to Naomasa on the other line. Hisashi was just across the room, humming away by the kitchen, as he prepared snacks for the kids just before dinner time. Social services are still processing their case, Naomasa began, his tone steady but carrying the weight of bureaucracy. Temporary guardianship remains with you and Hisashi for now. Both Hitoshi and Izuku are listed as wards under special protection due to the circumstances. It's complicated, but we're pushing to solidify their situation without bouncing them through the system. Shuda's throat tightened. The thought of either boy being taken away, even temporarily, was enough to make his jaw clench. He had only known them for a short time, but the idea of them being moved into the unknown again felt unbearable. Naomasa paused. We're making progress there. Shuda's silence confirmed that the conversation about the kid's case was left at that unresolved but progressing. Then Shoyuta decided to change the topic, a dark twist that he had to confirm. What about the investigation? The silence stretched, suffocating, before Naomasa answered. We've combed through the lab of what's left of it, at least, he said. No leads yet on who's running it. It's like they vanished. But we found some files. Shuda's grip on the phone tightened, the plastic creaking under his hold. Izuku and Hitoshi's files? A sigh filtered through the line, static clinging to the sound. Yes. A muscle in Shuda's jaw ticked. I'll be at your office in 5 minutes. His body was already moving, an unyielding force driving him to action. He needed to see those files. He needed the truth. No, Naomasa's voice cut through the air, sharper than before. There was an edge to it, a frayed thread of something close to panic. He cleared his throat, but the forced calm only amplified the unease. Shoyuta, it's better if you hear it from me. Over the phone. Shoyuta stopped in his tracks, the world narrowing to the thin line of Naomasa's voice. His breath hitched, a cold weight settling in his chest. If Naomasa didn't want him to see the files, it could only mean one thing. There was something inside, something too raw, too brutal that even a seasoned detective didn't think he could handle. And that meant it was bad. Really bad. Shuda's knuckles turned white around the phone. Tell me. The silence that followed was deafening. Izuku's file was labeled Experiment 001. The title alone made Shuda's stomach churn. It says he was born quirkless and taken to the lab at age 4. Shoyuta. The file documented every method used to force a quirk to manifest. Shuda's jaw clenched. Drag injections, electrocution, sensory deprivation. Shoyuta. They had locked Izuku at the age of 4 in a dark room for days. The doctors, these scientists. Naomasa spat the term like poison because it was. These individuals did not deserve to be called anything. They locked Izuku in a dark room for days with them banging on the door to terrify him into activating something. His first quirk appeared at the same age. They call it smokescreen. It manifested in that dark room. According to the file, he screamed for hours, begging someone to let him out. The smoke came when his fear hit its peak. They described it as a defense mechanism triggered by extreme panic. Shuda's mind drifted to the night of the storm, how the smoke had billowed out from Izuku when the thunder roared. It wasn't just a reaction, it was a trauma response. After a few minutes of pause, Naomasa continued. The second quirk came when he was 6. They call it Black Whip. It's violent and uncontrollable. They labeled it as extremely dangerous. The quirk manifested when he witnessed Hitoshi being hurt by a guard. Naomasa paused, maybe waiting for Shoyuta to react, maybe trying to calm himself down as he read through the report illustrating the unimaginable horror that the child had suffered. The last entry, Namsa, sounded like he swallowed something bitter. It says they attempted to manifest a third quirk by injecting Izuku with another drag. There's no mention of success, but the wording implies they were expecting something to happen soon. No manifestation as of yet was the last entry. The date of this entry confirms Izuku is 8 years old now. Shoyuta pressed a hand over his face, his breathing steady but strained. Izuku is he suffered for 4 years. What about Hitoshi? Shoyuta asked as soon as he found the strength to speak despite his body's tremors. Naomasa's hesitation spoke louder than words. Hitoshi's file wasn't as detailed about experiments. Most of it focuses on his quirk, brainwash. They brought him in when he was 7, meant to control Izuku when his quirks got out of hand. It says he refused to comply at first, but they hurt him. They hurt Izuku in front of him until he gave in. Repeatedly. Shoyuta closed his eyes. His main role was simple: put Izuku to sleep when he panicked or force him to obey when he was too scared to understand what they wanted. The punishments for Hitoshi escalated after Izuku's black whip appeared. More frequent. More violent. They used him not just as a tool but as a lever, hurting him to get a reaction from Izuku. The words scraped against Shuta's ears like knives. There's one more thing, Naomasa added. The file never mentions Izuku being physically incapable of speech. There's no record of damage to his vocal cords, nothing. Shuta's heart twisted. Selective mutism. It wasn't that Izuku couldn't speak, it was that he wouldn't. Psychological trauma had stolen his voice. Shoyuta? I need a minute, he muttered, cutting the call before Naomasa could respond. He shakily reached for the couch, his legs buckling at his weight. His whole body trembled, not with fear but with barely contained rage. It wasn't just about the quirks. It was about breaking them mind and soul. Hisashi was at his side within seconds, his eyes looking down at his husband with worry. He didn't hear the whole conversation, but based on Shuta's reaction, it was nothing good. But Shoyuta couldn't bring himself to recount what he just heard to his husband. It was just all too much. But Hisashi, ever so patient, understood immediately. He didn't push for answers, didn't ask for explanations. Instead, he sat beside Shoyuta and gently placed a hand on his back, a steady, grounding presence. Shuta's breathing hitched, but Hisashi's touch anchored him. It always did. Over the years, Hisashi had been a constant. A loud, vibrant personality to the world, but to Shoyuta, he was the quiet moments, the steady hand when everything else felt like it was slipping away. He had held Shoyuta through sleepless nights, through grief and rage and exhaustion. And now, when the weight of two broken children threatened to shatter him, Hisashi was there again. Silent but unwavering. Without a word, Hisashi pulled Shoyuta into a hug, firm, unyielding. Shoyuta let himself sink into it, his fingers curling into the back of Hisashi's shirt, his face buried in his shoulder. Shuta's hands clenched the fabric of Hisashi's shirt, his breathing ragged against his husband's shoulder. His knuckles were white, nails biting into his palms as he forced himself to stay grounded, to focus on Hisashi's steady presence instead of the fury boiling beneath his skin. Hisashi said nothing. He just held on, his touch the only thing keeping Shoyuta from breaking apart. Slowly, the rage ebbed, not gone, not really, but dulled beneath the steady rhythm of Hisashi's breathing, the soft hum of comfort he murmured against Shuta's ear. And in that quiet, Shoyuta let himself feel it all: the grief, the anger, the overwhelming ache for two broken boys who deserved so much more. The idea came to Hisashi slowly, like most of his best ideas did. He'd been sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine, when the sight of an art supply advertisement caught his eye. Bright colors, big smiles, hands smudged with paint, normal, happy childhood things. His gaze drifted to the staircase, the closed door at the top of it, and he found himself wondering how long it had been since either of the boys had a reason to smile like that. An hour later, he found himself at a quiet art supply store, picking out crayons, colored pencils, and a few coloring books with gentle, simple designs. Nothing too loud, nothing too busy, just soft lines and open spaces, something safe to fill in. He stopped by another aisle, his fingers brushing over sensory toys, soft fabrics, squishy ball, things meant to ground and comfort. He added a few of those to his basket, an idea forming as he wandered through the store. When he returned home, Shoyuta glanced up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow at the bag in Hisashi's hand. He didn't ask, but his eyes held a quiet curiosity. I thought, Hisashi hesitated, holding up a pack of crayons with a sheepish smile. Maybe the kids could use something to do? You know, something quiet in their room. No pressure. Shuta's expression softened. That's a good idea. Yeah. Buoyed by Shuta's quiet support, Hisashi made his way upstairs. He knocked, a gentle announcement of his presence to the boys on the other side of the room. Hisashi listened for the silence that followed after his knock, then the quiet padding of feet against the floor before the door opened a fraction, revealing Hitoshi by the doorway. "Is it already mealtime?" Hitoshi asked with genuine confusion because it was too early for Hisashi to bring them their meals. "No, not yet," Hisashi answered, caught a bit off guard at the question. "Unless you're hungry now? I can make you snacks." Hitoshi shook his head before he glanced down at the bags Hisashi was holding. "I bought some stuff," Hisashi said with a smile. "Thought you guys might like it." Hitoshi opened the door a bit more, his gaze drifting to the bag. "What is it?" "Just some crayons, coloring books," Hisashi said, slowly pulling out the items to show Hitoshi. "No rules. You can draw if you want or just look at the colors." Hitoshi's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in a kind of quiet consideration. Izuku peeked out from his position on the bed, knees drawn to his chest, his small fingers clutching his blanket. Hisashi didn't move. He let the moment stretch, a silent offer laid out before them with no strings attached. Hitoshi took a careful step forward, hands reaching for the bag that Hisashi had in his arms. The blonde watched Hitoshi retreat back to the middle of the room, coaxing Izuku out of the bed gently as his older brother laid out the items on the floor. Hisashi sat at a cautious distance by the hallway, close enough to be present but not overbearing. He had fully intended to leave the items and retreat, giving them space. But just as he began to rise, Hitoshi's voice, soft and uncertain, cut through the quiet. "Do you want to join us?" The question hung in the air, and for a heartbeat, Hisashi didn't move. His eyes flicked to Izuku, searching for signs of discomfort. The younger boy's face remained guarded, but there was no immediate sign of fear, just a careful stillness, as if waiting to see what would happen. "Only if it's okay," Hisashi answered just as gently, making sure his words were as much an offer as they were a request. Hitoshi nodded slowly, his grip on Izuku's hand tightening just a fraction. He didn't know how to explain half the things Hisashi had brought, and a part of him didn't want to get it wrong. "I don't know what all of this is." Hisashi sat across from them, folding his legs under himself, and kept his hands in his lap, present but not pushing. He let Hitoshi take the lead, recognizing the older boy's role as Izuku's anchor. Hitoshi picked up a green crayon, the waxy tip still sharp, from being new, and drew a line across the blank page. Izuku's eyes widened, his lips parting in a soft, astonished breath. His fingers twitched, drawn to the bright streak on the paper. The green line shimmered with familiarity like the color of his own hair, though Izuku couldn't yet place why it resonated with him. He hadn't yet learned the word for color, only that this green was something he knew, something he felt. Hisashi, noticing the curiosity, raised his hands slowly, his movements fluid and calm. He signed the word for color, his fingers curling and twisting with practiced ease. Izuku's gaze snapped to his hands, the spark of recognition flaring in his wide eyes. Hitoshi, ever patient, took Izuku's hand and gently guided his fingers to mimic the sign. "Color," he repeated, his voice a soft echo of Hisashi's gesture. "It's green." Hisashi watched Hitoshi spell the color's name for Izuku, watching Izuku repeat the gestures. Both Hitoshi and Hisashi watched as Izuku's lips moved, forming the word in silence. His small fingers copied the sign, the motion a bit clumsy but determined. Then Izuku's free hand reached up to his head, stretching a few curls as he tried to tell them something that only Hitoshi seemed to understand. The older boy let out a huff, a quiet chuckle Hisashi realized. "Yeah, your hair's green too," he said. Izuku then looked down at the scattered colors over the floor before he picked up another color, indigo, and handed it to Hitoshi before pointing at his hair. "Yeah, bud," Hitoshi answered, understanding what Izuku meant. "This is indigo," he added, spelling the name for Izuku to copy. Hisashi just sat back and watched the brothers bond, content to watch their little exchange and only stepping in if needed. Only for Izuku to reach another color that resembled Hisashi's hair before hesitantly handing it to him. Izuku did not make a move to shuffle closer to Hisashi, but he made sure to outstretch his hand close enough for Hisashi to reach the crayon. It took Hisashi off guard, but he slowly reached out, palm open, for Izuku to place the crayon on his hand. "Thank you," he said with a smile as Izuku grabbed for another crayon black, then his eyes darted past Hisashi, making the blonde look back to see Shoyuta halfway through climbing the stairs. Hizashi looked back to see if Izuku would hand the crayon to Shoyuta, but it seemed too big of a task now as his husband stopped midway to the stairs with 6 sets of eyes staring at him. What? Shoyuta asked, genuinely confused. Hizashi just gave him a smile before turning back to Izuku. It's okay, little listener, he said. I could give it to him if you'd like. Izuku's eyes darted at the crayon he held, then at Hizashi, then at Shoyuta, and finally at Hitoshi. The older boy's expression was carefully neutral, but beneath the calm exterior, there was a storm of emotion. Hitoshi was torn between the instinct to shield Izuku from everything and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to. His hesitation wasn't rooted in distrust of the adults but in fear of what might happen if this safe place turned out to be temporary, another false promise. But he didn't stop Izuku. He didn't reach out to pull him back or shake his head to discourage him. Instead, Hitoshi held still, allowing Izuku to make his own choice, a silent act of bravery for both of them. But Izuku held the crayon close to him before shaking his head shyly, sparing a glance at Shoyuta, who still looked genuinely confused at the exchange. What is it? Hizashi asked his husband. It's almost lunchtime, Shoyuta reminded. The kids might be hungry. Hizashi nodded in understanding before looking back at the kids. I'll be back, okay? He said as he started to stand up. The motion made Izuku's hands twitch in almost gesture that only Hitoshi was able to catch. It's okay, bud, Hitoshi said when Hizashi and Shoyuta disappeared downstairs. Hitoshi's voice was steady, but his hand trembled as he reached for another crayon. His own emotions were tangled, a mix of pride and fear. It wasn't easy to stand on this edge, where everything felt fragile, where one wrong move could shatter the delicate balance they'd found. But as he glanced at Izuku, still clutching the black crayon to his chest, a quiet realization settled over him. Maybe it was okay to take small steps forward. To let Izuku reach out even if it meant risking his own heart in the process. Izuku didn't react, he just kept staring at Hizashi even after the blonde had disappeared downstairs to prepare their lunch. But Hitoshi saw it, the tiniest shift in Izuku's posture, the barest softening of his expression. A step forward, no matter how small. Downstairs, the quiet clatter of dishes filled the kitchen as Shoyuta handed Hizashi a knife, watching his husband's expression closely. There was a brightness in Hizashi's eyes, a barely contained excitement that seemed to hum beneath his skin. His movements were quick but fluid, a rhythm to the way he chopped vegetables and stirred the pot on the stove. Shoyuta raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. What's got you all wound up? Hizashi glanced over his shoulder, a grin breaking through. What do you mean? You look like you're about to burst, Shoyuta said, passing him a bowl. What happened up there? Hizashi paused, the spatula in his hand resting against the edge of the pan. His other hand slipped into his pocket, fingers closing around something small. When he pulled it out, he held it carefully as though it were fragile. A yellow crayon, the edge still sharp from the unuse, rested in his palm. Shuta's brow furrowed. A crayon? He just handed it to me, Hizashi said, his voice soft but brimming with warmth. Hitoshi? Shoyuta asked, though he already felt a flicker of hope. No, Hizashi's smile widened, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Izuku. The name hung in the air, and for a moment, the kitchen felt smaller, cozier, wrapped in the quiet joy of something so simple, yet so monumental. He just, Shoyuta began, his voice barely above a whisper. He just gave it to you? Hizashi nodded, his thumb brushing over the crayon's edge. He didn't get too close, but he reached out, He reached out to me. Shuta's hand tightened around the dish towel, the weight of it grounding him. That's good, he said, his tone steady but his eyes betraying the emotions churning beneath the surface. It means he's not just observing. He's interacting. Hizashi's shoulders relaxed, a breath he didn't know he was holding slipping out. And he was the one to initiate it. I didn't ask. I didn't push. He just did it. They stood there, the quiet bubbling of the soup on the stove the only sound for a moment. Shoyuta moved closer, his arm brushing against Hizashi's. You've been so patient, he murmured. You've given him space and now he's starting to fill it. Hizashi's grin softened into something more tender. I just want him to feel safe, Sho. That's all. Shoyuta reached over, his hand settling on top of Hizashi's, crayon and all. He will. Because of you. They stayed like that for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. Then Hisashi turned back to the stove, his movements a bit lighter, the crayon still held carefully in his hand. Think they'd like what we'd whip up for them? He asked, his voice slipping back into its usual playful tone. Shoyuta snorted softly, the sound more relief than amusement. I think they'd love it. Hisashi's hum filled the kitchen, a melody of contentment as he started buttering the bread. Shoyuta continued to help, but his mind lingered on that small yellow crayon, on the tiny, brave gesture that it represented. Upstairs, the boys remained on the floor, surrounded by crayons and sheets of paper. Hitoshi had settled into a rhythm, his purple crayon moving steadily across the page. Izuku, still perched beside him, mirrored his movements, though his own paper remained a chaotic sprawl of lines and circles. Hitoshi spoke softly as he drew, his words meant more for Izuku's understanding than for conversation. These are trees, he explained, sketching green tufts atop thin brown lines. And this is the sky. Izuku's head tilted, his green eyes following every slide. Hitoshi drew clouds, soft, round shapes, and a bright yellow sun. He pointed to each, spelling out the words in sign language and waiting as Izuku repeated them, his small hands a bit clumsy but growing more confident. When Hitoshi drew a blue sky, Izuku mimicked the sign for blue, his lips forming the word in silence. Then, as if a thought had struck him, he picked up the purple crayon again and began making small loops and scribbles on his paper. His drawing wasn't anything specific, but there was a pattern to his chaos, an attempt to mimic what his brother had done. His focus was intense, his tongue poking slightly from the corner of his mouth as he worked. Time seemed to slip away, the quiet of the room broken only by the soft scratch of crayon against paper. Hitoshi continued to draw simple shapes and scenes, every now and then showing Izuku how to hold the crayon differently or how to make softer lines. Eventually, Izuku's small motions slowed. His head began to bob, his eyes fluttering shut as sleep tugged him under. When the crayon finally slipped from his fingers, Hitoshi moved carefully, his arm slipping around his brother's small frame. He lifted Izuku gently, cradling him against his chest as he moved to the bed. The purple crayon remained clutched in Izuku's hand, a tiny reminder of the progress they'd made. Just as Hitoshi laid Izuku down, the familiar soft knock echoed gentle in the room before the door opened, and Shoyuta and Hisashi appeared, plates in hand. Oh, we could bring Izuku's food later, Hisashi said, his voice a warm whisper when he saw the sleeping boy. Hitoshi just nodded, settling the blanket over his brother before turning back to the adults. He hesitated, his lips pressing together before he finally spoke. He liked drawing. Hisashi's expression softened, and Shuta's gaze remained steady. That's good, Shoyuta said, keeping his voice low. You both seem to enjoy it. Hitoshi's fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. I don't know if this is okay, he admitted. If it's safe to like things. Shoyuta stepped closer, kneeling so he was at Hitoshi's eye level. You don't have to decide everything right now, he said. You get to take your time. You get to feel safe first. And we're here, Hisashi added, standing just behind Shoyuta. However long it takes. There was no pressure in their voices, no expectation. Just a quiet promise that the choice was Hitoshi's to make. That they would be there, steady and patient, no matter what. Hitoshi didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on Izuku's shoulder. The adults took the hint, setting down the plates and retreating with a soft smile. And in the stillness that followed, Hitoshi allowed himself to believe, even if only a little, that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The night was quiet. The only sounds in the house were the faint creak of wood settling and the occasional soft sigh of wind against the windows. The darkness felt heavier upstairs, where silence pressed in like a thick blanket over the sleeping household. But Izuku was awake. He didn't know what had woken him at first. One moment, he was curled beside Hitoshi, Izuku's hands rested on Hitoshi's. The next, he was staring at his brother's form, watching him twitch and murmur in his sleep. It wasn't unusual. Hitoshi sometimes shifted around, just like Izuku did when his mind felt too loud for sleep. Then it got worse. Hitoshi's breaths grew sharper, ragged. His arms jerked, fists clenching and unclenching in a desperate rhythm. A low, broken sound escaped his lips, half a whimper, half a plea. Izuku froze, heart pounding as panic rose like a wave, crashing against his ribs. This was different. This was bad. The walls were too white, too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed above, buzzing like trapped insects. He was back there, the lab. His small feet were bare against the cold, tiled floor. His wrists ached, phantom pains from the too tight restraints they used to hold him down. "You know what to do," a voice rasped, sharp and clinical. He couldn't see their face, just a silhouette behind a glass window. A hand on a switch, a threat woven into the silence. Make him sleep. Make him compliant. Or you both suffer. Hitoshi's throat tightened. His voice wouldn't come. He turned, and there was Izuku's small, trembling, green eyes wide and glassy. His lips moved, soundless, but Hitoshi understood the plea. "Please, don't make me." But his lips moved anyway. "Izuku," his quirk pulsed, a weight on his tongue. "Sleep," he whispered, and Izuku crumpled to the floor, his small form swallowed by the too bright light. The floor rippled beneath him, the tiles cracking like ice. Darkness bled through the seams, swallowing the white until all that remained was shadow. Hitoshi was trapped, feet sinking, his fingers scraping against a glass wall he couldn't break. And Izuku's cries, soft, broken, echoed through the dark. "Izuku!" Hitoshi called, panicking when he couldn't find him yet hear his cries. "Izuku! Izuku, where are you?" Hitoshi shouted, his voice raw, but the crying echoed and it didn't stop. "No. No, no, please. Please don't hurt him. Izuku!" His fists pounded against the glass, his knuckles split and bled, but nothing broke. The darkness pressed closer, colder. His brother's cries twisted, warped into something unrecognizable, a haunting melody of fear. Smokescreen flared without warning. The dark haze crept around the room, a silent, creeping fog that thickened with every beat of Izuku's fear. It curled around his feet, spilled off the bed, and clouded the small patch of moonlight filtering through the curtains. Izuku's hands shook. He didn't know what to do. He pressed himself against the headboard of their bed, eyes flickering between the writhing form of his brother and the smoke spiraling from his skin. His chest heaved with silent sobs. He couldn't wake Hitoshi, couldn't stop the smoke, couldn't fix this. Then he remembered. The bathroom door. He'd seen Hitoshi open it before, leading to another room in the house, hand reaching for the knob and twisting it to step inside. He remembered Hisashi coming out of the room at the end of the hall when he brought in their first clothes and his blanket. Maybe that was how you got help. Maybe if he did the same thing. Izuku stumbled to his feet, his smokescreen trailing after him, and shuffled toward the end of the hallway. His bare feet barely made a sound against the floorboards as he stopped in front of the closed door to show Yuta and Hisashi's room. He stared at the knob for a long moment, his breathing still uneven, before slowly reaching out. It rattled. A sharp sound in the dead of night. Inside, Shuta's eyes snapped open. Years of instincts roared to life as he bolted upright, already halfway reaching for his capture weapon before his mind fully registered the sound. His first thought, someone's broken in. His second thought, the kids. Hisashi, he muttered hoarsely, shaking his husband awake. Hisashi groaned softly. What's going on? Then the door creaked open. A small, trembling figure stood at the threshold, smoke clinging to his frame like a storm cloud. Izuku. And he was crying. Shuta's body untensed, but his mind raced even faster now. Izuku. His voice was low, calm, but there was an edge of urgency underneath. What's wrong? Hisashi, now fully awake, blinked blearily at the sight before him. Hey, little listener. It's okay, he said softly, his voice slipping into that gentle tone he always used when Izuku was scared. What happened? Izuku didn't move. He didn't sign. His sobs were quiet, his body shaking, but his wide green eyes were screaming for something they couldn't quite explain. Then Hitoshi's head tilted, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. "Is it Hitoshi?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. The slight nod was all they needed. "All right," Shoyuta said, already standing, "take us to him." Izuku turned and retraced his hesitant steps back to their shared room. His smoke screen still drifted in thin tendrils, but it was beginning to fade. Hisashi trailed close behind, his hand ghosting near Izuku's back without touching, just in case the boy needed him. When they entered the room, the sight was immediate: Hitoshi, thrashing and murmuring, locked in the grip of a nightmare. His hands clutched at the sheets, his head jerking side to side, and his face twisted in pain that sleep refused to release him from. Shoyuta moved first. He knelt beside the bed, a steady hand reaching out to gently grasp Hitoshi's shoulder. "Hitoshi," he murmured, his voice low but firm. "It's okay. You're safe. Wake up." Hitoshi flinched at the touch, his eyes snapping open, wild and disoriented. His breath came in sharp gasps as he stared at Shoyuta, taking several seconds before reality finally sank in, but the steady tears that trailed down his face didn't stop. For a moment, he was still in the lab, cold tiles beneath him, harsh lights above. But then, the soft press of a blanket against his skin. The gentle hum of voices, not sharp commands, but calm and steady. His violet eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. The room was dim, the hallway light a sliver against the half-open door. His mind struggled to catch up, to untangle the twisted threads of dream and reality. His ears caught snippets of Shuta's low murmur, the soothing cadence of Hisashi's reassurances. His body remained tense, every muscle poised to flee, but the world around him remained still safe. "You're safe," Shoyuta repeated softly. "Just a nightmare." Behind him, Hisashi felt a tug at his pant leg. He looked down to find Izuku clutching the fabric of his sweatpants, his small fingers white-knuckled and desperate. The boy's smokescreen had almost completely dissipated, but his fear still clung to him like a shadow. Hisashi didn't move too fast. He reached down, slow and gentle, and lightly ruffled Izuku's hair, just a soft, calming motion. "You did good," he whispered. "You got help. That was brave." Izuku didn't respond, but his grip on Hisashi's pants didn't loosen. And so they stayed there, Shoyuta grounding Hitoshi with a steady voice, Hisashi standing by Izuku, and the silent comfort of knowing, even in the dead of night, that no one was alone. The silence that filled the room after Hitoshi's nightmare was thick and fragile, as if the air itself had been holding its breath. Izuku sat close to his brother, his small frame half hidden beneath the blanket, but his wide green eyes never left his brother. Hitoshi's breathing had slowed, the rapid rhythm of his chest finally settling into something softer, but the shadows of his dreams still lingered. His hand trembled as he ran it through his messy indigo hair, his fingers catching in the knots. Shoyuta stayed seated at the edge of his bed, prepared to step in and help Hitoshi calm down if needed. He stared at the wall, not really seeing it, his mind still trapped somewhere between the past and the present. "I thought," his voice cracked, quiet and raw. "I thought I was back there." Izuku didn't move. He just listened, his hands twisting the edge of the blanket as if it might unravel the tension in the room. Hitoshi swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing with the effort. "I couldn't find him. In the lab. I heard Izuku crying, but he wasn't there." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought they took him." The confession hung in the air, heavy and full of a fear that words couldn't quite capture. It was a wound laid bare, the kind that didn't heal with bandages or time alone. Shoyuta opened his mouth to offer assurance, to say that it won't be happening anytime soon because Hitoshi is here now, and Izuku both safe. Izuku didn't answer. He couldn't. His voice remained locked behind the walls his trauma had built, and his hands tightened around the blanket until his knuckles turned white. But then slowly he let go. His small hand reached out, fingers brushing against Hitoshi's sleeve. It was the gentlest of touches, a soft tug that barely moved the fabric. But it was enough. It was Izuku's way of saying what he couldn't: "I am here." Hitoshi's breath hitched, his violet eyes finally meeting Izuku's. The older boy's expression crumbled, a mix of relief and exhaustion that brought fresh tears to his eyes. He let out a shuddering breath, and then his own hand closed over Izuku's, their fingers lacing together in a quiet promise. Shoyuta relaxed at the sight at the silent conversation the kids made to each other. The soft footsteps of his husband made Shoyuta turn just in time for Hisashi to come into the room. He held 2 mugs, steam curling from the tops, and the soft scent of warm milk filled the room. "Hey, little listeners," Hisashi greeted them softly, his voice a gentle murmur. "Thought you could use something warm." Izuku looked up at Hisashi, then at the mugs curiously before he turned to Hitoshi, who gave him a new word to learn. "Milk," Hitoshi said, his hands in fluid motion as he taught his brother the sign. Izuku's gaze drifted to the cups, his small nose twitching at the faint sweetness in the air. Hitoshi reached for the mugs, his grip careful as he handed one to Izuku. The warmth seeped through the ceramic, grounding him, and he took a tentative sip, the taste of honey and vanilla coating his tongue. Izuku mimicked him, the rim of the mug too big for his small hands, but he managed. The warmth spread through his chest, easing the tightness that had lingered since the nightmare started. They sat together, shoulders touching, the mugs cradled in their hands. And as the minutes stretched, the fear ebbed away, leaving behind only the soft hum of comfort shared between brothers. In the quiet of the night, they found solace not in words, but in the warmth of each other's presence, the steady beat of their hearts, and the promise that they were still here. Still together. The kitchen was bathed in the soft, amber glow of the stove light. Outside, the world was still, the deep lull of night wrapping the house in a blanket of quiet. Shoyuta leaned against the counter, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of milk, steam curling lazily into the air. Across from him, Hisashi sat at the table, his own mug cradled between his hands, thumb tracing the rim absently. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them was familiar, comfortable in its own way. It was the kind of quiet that only came after the storm, when all the edges had softened and the world felt like it was finally taking a breath. Shoyuta sipped his milk, letting the warmth fill the hollow ache in his chest. "That was rough," he said finally, his voice a soft rasp against the stillness. Hisashi nodded, his green eyes reflecting the dim light. "Yeah. But they got through it. We all did." He set his mug down, his fingers resting on the ceramic like he needed the solidness of it to ground himself. "Izuku came to us," Shoyuta continued, his brow furrowing slightly. "He could have stayed frozen. Could have hidden under the covers or shut down completely. But he didn't. He was scared," Hisashi agreed, "but he asked for help. In his own way." His lips curled into a gentle smile, pride threading through his words. "That's huge for him." Shuta's eyes drifted to the darkened staircase just beyond the kitchen door. "And Hitoshi," he added. "He let himself be vulnerable. He didn't push us away when we sat with him. He let us help." His thumb tapped lightly against his mug, a soft rhythm in the quiet. "I didn't think we'd get here so soon." "Neither did I." Hisashi's voice dropped, a whisper that felt almost sacred in the dim light. "Remember the first night? How they wouldn't leave each other's side. How Izuku wouldn't even look at us, and Hitoshi. He had that edge, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop." Shuta's jaw tightened at the memory. "I remember." His voice was a low rumble, a quiet storm. "I remember thinking that it might take months just to through to them." He let out a breath, slow and measured. "But now, they're just down the hall. Sleeping. Safe." Hisashi's hand reached out, fingers brushing against Shuta's arm. "We're getting there, Sho. Step by step." His thumb moved in small circles, a comforting pressure. "It's not just about the nightmares or the quiet moments, it's everything in between. It's Izuku reaching out to me with that crayon. It's Hitoshi letting himself rest, even if his sleep is still rough. It's them being kids, even for a little while." Shuta's expression softened, the hard lines of his worry easing under Hisashi's touch. "It's more than I thought we'd have at this point." He set his mug down, his hands now free to wrap around Hisashi's, their fingers threading together. The silence stretched again, but this time it was filled with the weight of their shared promise, their unspoken vow to be there for as long as the boys needed. They're still so fragile, Shoyuta murmured. But there's strength there too. You can see it. Hitoshi's stubbornness, Izuku's quiet bravery. It's there under all that hurt. And we'll keep showing up for them, Hisashi said, his voice warm and sure. Every day. No matter what. They fell into a comfortable quiet again, their breaths aligning, the warmth of their mugs seeping into their palms. Outside, the wind whispered against the glass, a soft lullaby to the stillness inside. We didn't expect this, Shoyuta admitted, a small, almost disbelieving laugh escaping him. A few weeks ago it was just us. It feels like there's a whole world upstairs, wrapped in those two kids. Hisashi chuckled, the sound light but filled with affection. A world worth protecting. Shoyuta nodded, his expression a blend of resolve and tenderness. A world worth everything. And as the night held them, they stayed their two steady anchors in the storm, ready to guide those who needed them most safely to shore. The morning light slipped through the edges of the curtains, casting soft lines across the bedroom floor. Hitoshi stirred first, the remnants of his nightmare still a shadow at the edges of his mind, but dulled by the warmth of Izuku curled against his side. His younger brother's small fingers remained laced in his sleeve, a quiet anchor throughout the night. Hitoshi blinked, the gentle rise and fall of Izuku's breathing coaxing him into the present. The quiet hum of voices downstairs reached them muffled but familiar. Shoyuta and Hisashi, probably preparing breakfast, their tones a soothing undercurrent to the stillness of the morning. Izuku began to stir, a soft, muffled sound escaping him as he rubbed his eyes. Hitoshi watched, a small smile ghosting over his lips as Izuku's curls fluffed up, a mess from sleep. The younger boy blinked up at him, green eyes soft and hazy, and Hitoshi signed a simple, "Good morning." Izuku responded in kind, his hands moving slowly but surely, still waking up. His lips moved silently, echoing the sign. "Good morning." They sat there for a moment, wrapped in the quiet comfort of the room. But as the scent of something warm and sweet drifted up the stairs pancakes, maybe Hitoshi felt a shift in the air. Izuku's nose twitched, his eyes following the invisible trail of the smell, curiosity threading through his features. Hitoshi opened his mouth, then closed it. His lips pressed together as he hesitated, uncertainty clawing at his thoughts. The question hung on the tip of his tongue, heavy with the weight of what it could mean. He wanted to ask if Izuku wanted to go downstairs, if he wanted to step outside the safe cocoon of their room, but the words tangled and twisted, stuck in his throat. What if it was too much? What if it backfired? What if the idea of it scared Izuku, made him retreat even further? Hitoshi's heartbeat thudded in his ears, a low, dull rhythm of doubt. But then Izuku looked up at him, those wide green eyes curious and cautious, and Hitoshi thought of the small, brave steps they had taken. The quiet moments of trust, the tentative smiles, the crayon still tucked in Hisashi's pocket as a reminder of Izuku's small but monumental gesture. He drew a breath, his fingers brushing against Izuku's hand. His voice, when it came, was soft and careful, a question wrapped in gentleness. "You want to go down?" Izuku's brows furrowed, his small hands twisting the edge of the blanket. His gaze darted to the door, then back to Hitoshi, a silent question in his eyes. The hesitation sat between them, fragile and raw. Hitoshi felt his own breath hitch, his chest tight with anticipation. He could almost hear the seconds stretching, each one marked by the quiet tick of a clock somewhere in the house. His hands remained still, no pressure, just an offer. And then, slowly, Izuku nodded. It was the smallest motion, barely more than a tilt of his head, but to Hitoshi, it was like a wave crashing over him. Relief unfurled in his chest, soft and warm, pushing back the lingering shadows of his own fears. His shoulders eased, and he allowed himself the smallest, most genuine smile. "Okay," Hitoshi said, the word wrapped in quiet pride. "Let's go." They moved slowly, Hitoshi standing first and holding out his hand. Izuku took it, his grip small but steady, his other hand still gripped his own blanket close to his body, his safe space, and together they approached the door. Izuku's steps faltered at the threshold, his bare feet curling against the floorboards, but Hitoshi didn't rush him. When they reached the top of the stairs, Izuku's bravery wavered. He stared down the steps, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. The stairs seemed to stretch on forever, each step a mystery shrouded in uncertainty. There had been no stairs in the lab, only flat, cold floors and walls that closed in. The idea of stepping down into an open, unfamiliar space felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Hitoshi noticed immediately. He always did. Izuku's small frame seemed to shrink further, his knuckles turning white as he clutched his blanket. And there it was, the soft curl of smoke, thin tendrils slipping from Izuku's sleeves and pooling gently at his feet. It moved slowly, a quiet fog that hinted at the unease simmering beneath Izuku's stillness. Hitoshi didn't speak right away. He didn't want to startle him. Instead, he crouched down, keeping his posture loose and open. "It's okay," he said softly. "We don't have to go all the way if you don't want to. We can stay here." Izuku's wide eyes darted from the stairs to Hitoshi's face. The smoke wavered, the thin tendrils pausing mid-air, as if waiting for direction. The idea of going downstairs pulled at Izuku's curiosity tangled with fear. But there was a wall between wanting and doing, a barrier built by years of closed doors and tight spaces. Hitoshi extended his hand, palm up, his fingers steady. "We can take it slow. One step at a time." He didn't push, just let the words hang in the air, a gentle offering. "You can hold on to me or the railing, whatever you need." Izuku's breath came in soft, shallow pulls. The smoke curled closer around his ankles, a soft gray veil that moved in rhythm with his heartbeat. His small hand lifted, hesitating before settling in Hitoshi's. His grip was light, tentative but real. "That's it," Hitoshi murmured, his voice threading through the smoke, keeping it from thickening. "You're doing great." The first step was the hardest. Izuku's foot hovered, his balance wavering. The wood beneath him groaned softly, a sound that sent a fresh curl of smoke rising from his sleeve. Hitoshi's thumb rubbed over his knuckles, grounding him, and the smoke receded just a bit. "Just one step," Hitoshi encouraged. "We're not in a rush." Another step. The smoke lingered but didn't grow. It moved with them, a shadow at their heels, but it didn't lead. Izuku's fingers tightened around Hitoshi's, his blanket dragging softly along the railing as they moved. Each step was a battle. Izuku's feet shuffled cautiously, his body leaning toward Hitoshi for balance. The smoke remained close, a soft gray that whispered of his nerves. But Hitoshi stayed with him, his own feet moving slowly, his voice a constant thread of quiet encouragement. "Halfway there." His words were gentle, threaded with pride. "You've already done so much." The smoke thinned, wisps curling into the air and dissolving before they could settle. Izuku's breath steadied, each exhale a puff of mist in the cool air. His feet moved a bit more surely each step, finding the wood beneath him with a little less hesitation. When they reached the bottom, Izuku's foot hovered over the last step, the final threshold. A wisp of smoke curled around his ankle, a last remnant of his fear. Hitoshi didn't move, his own feet already on the solid ground, his hands still wrapped around Izuku's. "It's okay," Hitoshi whispered. "You're almost there." Izuku's foot touched down, the cool floor solid and real. The smoke hesitated, the last curl of gray hanging in the air before it dissipated entirely. It was as if the smoke had been holding its breath alongside him, and now, finally, it could let go. Hitoshi gave his hand a gentle squeeze, his own expression soft with relief. "You did it," he said, his smile small but bright. "I'm so proud of you." Izuku's lips parted, a soft exhale escaping him. His shoulders, which had been hunched with tension, eased just a little. His hand remained in Hitoshi's, the connection a lifeline he wasn't quite ready to let go of. They stood there, the morning light filtering through the window, painting soft shadows around them. The world felt a bit bigger, a bit more open. And though the room beyond still seemed too large, too filled with possibilities, Izuku had made it. One step at a time. And Hitoshi had been there for all of it, his quiet encouragements lingering in the air like a promise steady and unwavering. They took a few steps forward, and as they did, the gentle hum of voices drew closer. Shoyuta and Hizashi were in the kitchen, their backs to the room as they moved in an easy rhythm, Hizashi flipping pancakes, Shoyuta setting plates on the counter. The scent of breakfast hung in the air, warm and welcoming. Hitoshi felt Izuku's fingers tighten on his hand, a pulse of uncertainty. But before he could say anything, Hizashi turned, his expression shifting from casual to something softer, more careful. "Hey, there." Hizashi's voice was gentle, each syllable carefully chosen, but even the soft tone wasn't enough to stop Hitoshi's subtle flinch or the way Izuku instinctively edged behind his brother, his small fingers twisting into the back of Hitoshi's shirt. Shoyuta, who had been in the middle of setting a plate on the counter, froze. His body held an unnatural stillness, like a statue caught in the act of something mundane. Hizashi didn't miss the way Shuta's knuckles tightened around the edge of the plate, as if even the smallest clatter could shatter the fragile calm of the moment. Neither of them moved. Not forward, not back. Just there present, but not overbearing. Hizashi's mind raced, balancing the delicate line between invitation and intrusion. His lips moved again, softer this time, words wrapped in the gentlest intention. Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes. We were going to bring it up to your room." Hitoshi's expression shifted immediately. His violet eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty sparking beneath his guarded expression. His shoulders tensed, a tiny motion that spoke volumes. His lips parted, the barest whisper of a breath as if he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. His hesitation hung heavy in the air, a fear-laced question caught between them. Were they not allowed to be here? The room seemed to hold its breath with him. And then movement. A shadow behind Izuku. Blackwhip. It wasn't the wild, uncontrollable lash of before. It was slower, a cautious tendril that slipped out from behind Izuku's small form like a curious snake. It lingered in the air, not striking but hovering, waiting. The inky tendril remained coiled and tight, a reflection of the boy's inner turmoil. It was a subconscious defense, a shield preparing for the worst. Shuta's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in sharp, focused attention. He knew that sign. It was a quirk's language, one he had learned to read with the same care as spoken words. Blackwhip was not just a manifestation of fear but an expectation, a sign that punishment was not just anticipated but prepared for. He spoke, his voice a quiet ripple against the tension. "Unless you'd like to eat here?" His tone was steady, a deliberate contrast to the storm of fear swirling beneath the surface. Hitoshi's shoulders dropped a fraction. Not fully relaxed, but the difference was clear. He was no longer bracing himself for something bad. His hand, which had been a steadying force on Izuku's arm, loosened just slightly, his fingers uncurled from the tight grip against the fabric of Izuku's blanket. The shadow of Blackwhip faltered, the tendril hesitating before it began to retract, slipping back into the quiet safety of Izuku's form. It was slow, the quirk reflecting the uncertainty still lingering in the air. "Oh, I'm sorry," Hizashi's voice broke through, a touch of regret coloring his tone. His lips pressed together in a thin line, and he took a small step back, giving the boys more space. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you couldn't be here. His hands moved unconsciously, half-formed signs slipping into his words. "I didn't want you to feel pressured to eat here if you weren't ready." The air shifted. A careful balance restored. Izuku, still half-hidden behind Hitoshi, watched Hizashi closely. His wide green eyes remained on the man's hands, tracking the soft, steady movements. And then delicate and hesitant Izuku's own hands moved. "Picnic." The word hung between them, light but deliberate. Hizashi's breath caught in his throat, his chest filling with a quiet, blooming warmth. His lips stretched into a smile, the kind that started slow and softened the sharp edges of his face. Yeah, little listener," he answered, his own hands signing the word back to Izuku, his fingers steady and sure. "A picnic sounds perfect." Shuta's expression mirrored the sentiment, his dark eyes brightening, a subtle shift that most wouldn't catch. But for the boys, who had learned to read every twitch and turn of a face for danger, the gentleness in Shuta's gaze spoke volumes. Hitoshi turned to Izuku, his own lips curving into a small, almost hidden smile. "You want to eat here?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for his brother's ears. Izuku's response was a small nod, his curls bouncing with the motion. His fingers remained tight around his blanket, but he took a half step forward, the movement quiet but profound. Hizashi's hands moved again, slow and deliberate. "We can set up a picnic right here," he suggested, his fingers dancing along with his words for Izuku. He made no move to set it up immediately, though. He waited, letting the idea settle, giving them time to decide if this was what they truly wanted. And it was Hitoshi who took the first step, leading his brother with him as they moved towards the corner of the living room. The adults followed their lead, Hizashi pulling a soft, quilted blanket from the arm of the couch and spreading it gently over the floor. The fabric pooled softly, creating a small, safe island amidst the openness of the room. Shoyuta brought the plates over, his movements fluid and calm. He didn't place the plates too close, instead, setting them a bit to the side, leaving space for the boys to choose where they wanted to sit. He stepped back, a quiet retreat, his eyes never leaving them but offering no pressure, only patience. Hitoshi took the plate first, his fingers brushing against the cool ceramic. He handed a piece to Izuku, watching closely as his brother hesitated, then took a small bite. The soft texture seemed to surprise him, his lips parting slightly as if expecting something else, something bitter or cold. But when the taste settled, his expression shifted, a hint of wonder touching his features. And the smoke-screen thin wisps of gray that had started to curl around his fingers dissipated fully, the last tendril vanishing into the morning air. Shoyuta and Hizashi remained nearby, not too close but not too far. They exchanged a glance, something soft and unspoken passing between them. This was progress. A small, tender step forward. The quiet remained, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the soft sounds of breakfast being shared, the rustle of the blanket beneath shifting feet, and the gentle hum of safety wrapping itself around them all. For the first time, in the light of the new day, the house felt a little more like home. And when the next morning arrived, with the soft shuffle of hesitant footsteps on the stairs and two small figures appearing at the edge of the living room, it was as if the sun shone a little brighter through the windows. Hizashi's breath hitched, a warmth blooming in his chest that he couldn't quite contain. His lips curled into a soft smile, the kind that ached with quiet joy. And if his eyes shimmered just a bit too much, well, he didn't hide it. He blinked slowly, letting the tears gather and spill over, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sweetness of this tiny, ordinary miracle. Because there they were. The boys, wrapped in blankets and quiet bravery, choosing to be here with them. Choosing to take another step forward, no matter how small. And as Shuta's fingers intertwined with his own, offering a gentle squeeze of understanding, Hizashi let the warmth fill him completely. Because in this moment, with the soft hum of breakfast cooking, the gentle rustle of blankets, and the boys' cautious but hopeful eyes, it felt like they weren't just in a house, they were building a home. One tender, tear-filled moment at a time. The soft hum of morning had become a quiet rhythm in the household. It had been a month since the boys had come to live with them, and routines had slowly stitched themselves into the fabric of their days. Breakfast was a gentle affair. The boys would emerge from their room, always with Izuku's blanket in hand, and shuffle down the stairs with careful steps. They would settle on the living room floor, the soft quilt beneath them, and eat their breakfast in the quiet safety of their makeshift picnic. After lunch, they would retreat back upstairs. Bath time was a quiet ritual, followed by naps that stretched into the early afternoon. The rest of the day, the boys would stay in their room. Shoyuta and Hizashi had learned not to press, offering gentle invitations to come downstairs whenever they liked, but never pushing. It was on a morning like any other, with the light slanting softly through the windows, that Hizashi noticed something. It was a small detail, the kind only someone looking closely might see. Every morning, aside from Izuku's blanket, the boys brought nothing with them. No toys, no books, none of the small things that had slowly begun to fill their room over the past month. Hizashi didn't bring it up right away. He watched, careful and quiet, as the boys settled into their usual spot. Hitoshi unwrapped the edge of the blanket, offering a small square of fabric to Izuku, who clung to it with both hands. They sat close, always touching, as if the thread of their connection kept the world from unraveling around them. When breakfast was over and the plates were set aside, Hitoshi folded his legs beneath him, his posture open and inviting. "Hey, little listeners," he began softly, his voice warm but careful. "You know, you can bring your things with you when you come down." Hitoshi's head tilted, confusion drawing his brows together. His lips parted slightly, a question hovering in the air. Things?" "Yeah." Hitoshi's smile was small, gentle. "Your toys, your books. Whatever you want." Izuku's fingers twisted in the blanket, his eyes darting to Hitoshi as if seeking permission or guidance. Hitoshi's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "We're allowed?" he asked, his voice a thin thread of uncertainty. "Of course," Hitoshi said, his own hands moving slowly as he signed the words along with his speech. "If you want to." The room seemed to hold its breath. Izuku's hands stilled, the blanket's edge clutched tightly in his small fists. Hitoshi's expression was a tangled mix of curiosity and caution, the kind of look a child might give a gift they weren't sure they were allowed to accept. "Would you like to do something together?" Hitoshi suggested gently. "Maybe read one of the books from the shelf?" The boy's eyes followed his gesture to the modest bookshelf in the corner of the room. Soft spines in a rainbow of colors lined the shelves, their titles a promise of quiet adventures. But there was no immediate spark of excitement, only a slow, creeping uncertainty. Hitoshi's hands moved, a small sign that Hitoshi almost missed. "Read." Hitoshi nodded. "We could read together if you want. I could read to you or you could read on your own. Whatever feels right." Hitoshi's expression shifted, a quiet struggle playing out in the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice small. "Not really." Hitoshi's expression remained open, no trace of judgment. "That's okay. We can take it slow. I could read to you, and you can follow along if you want." Izuku's eyes darted to Shoyuta, a movement so quick Hitoshi almost missed it. But he caught it the way Izuku's small hands tightened around the blanket, his lips pressing together as if holding back words he couldn't quite shape. Or maybe, Hitoshi's voice softened further. "Maybe Shoyuta could read to us?" The suggestion hung in the air, and Shoyuta, who had been a steady presence in the background, stilled. His dark eyes widened, a quiet surprise settling over his features. The boys had never initiated anything with him before, always with Hitoshi, whose softer demeanor seemed to draw them in. But now, there was a small shift, a possibility that felt as fragile as it was hopeful. "If you'd like," Shoyuta said, his voice warm but cautious. "I'd be happy to." Hitoshi looked to Izuku, and Izuku, in turn, nodded. A small, hesitant motion, but filled with a quiet bravery that pulled at Shuta's heart. Shoyuta moved carefully, settling on the floor a few spaces away from the boys. He reached for a book, a soft story with gentle illustrations, and opened it to the first page. His voice slipped into the room, low and steady, as he began to read. Izuku's shoulders remained tense at first, his small body drawn close to Hitoshi's. But as the story unfolded, as Shuta's voice wrapped around the room like a warm blanket, something shifted. Hitoshi's hands moved occasionally, small signs whispered between him and Izuku, translating, teaching, sharing. The story continued, each word a quiet offering. And in the soft light of the morning, surrounded by the gentle cadence of Shuta's voice, the boys began to settle. The tension in the room eased, and for a while, the world outside their small circle seemed to fade away. It was a new step, another thread woven into the tapestry of healing. And as the last words of the story drifted into the stillness, Shoyuta closed the book, a small smile touching his lips as he looked up to find two pairs of tired, but quietly hopeful, eyes watching him. That night, Shoyuta had to deliberately ignore his husband's coy smile and teasing expressions because Hitoshi caught him browsing for children's books online just as they settled for bed. Shoyuta sat on the edge of their bed, the dim glow of his phone casting soft shadows across his face. His thumb swiped slowly, carefully, through pages of brightly colored book covers, stories of gentle adventures, of friendship, of safe and soft places. Each title he lingered on, he imagined how it might sound in his own voice, how the words might carry through the quiet air of the living room while two small faces watched him from their blanket fort. Beside him, Hitoshi's breath had evened out, his body tucked under the covers with the ease of a man who had spent years learning how to find sleep even when the world outside was anything but restful. But Shoyuta knew the slight curl of Hitoshi's lips wasn't just a remnant of a dream. His husband was awake, no doubt keeping his eyes closed to avoid giving away his quiet amusement. "You can say it, Shoyuta muttered, not looking up from his phone. Hitoshi's lips quirked higher, and he cracked one eye open. "Say what, Sho?" His voice was warm with sleep, the edges of his words softened by the late hour. "That you think I'm going soft?" A chuckle escaped Hitoshi, low and affectionate. "I'd never say that. Not when I'm enjoying it so much." Shoyuta huffed, but there was no real heat behind it. "I'm just preparing. In case they ask again." Hitoshi shifted, curling closer to Shuta's side. "You're allowed to enjoy it, They liked listening to you." Shuta's thumb paused over a story about a little fox who found a home. His chest tightened with a feeling he couldn't quite name, something tender and raw. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." Hitoshi's hand found his, warm fingers brushing over his knuckles. "You're doing great, Sho." The words settled over him like a blanket, and for a moment, Shoyuta let himself believe them. Let himself imagine a future where reading stories was just a normal part of their routine, where the boys felt safe enough to ask for it without hesitation. He added the book to the cart and set his phone aside, slipping under the covers. As he pulled Hitoshi close, his husband's breath evened out again, and Shoyuta allowed his own eyes to close, a small, hopeful smile touching his lips. Because tonight, the world felt just a little bit softer, and the quiet promise of tomorrow held more warmth than it had in a long time. The afternoon sun had dipped just enough to cast a warm, amber glow through the window, spilling soft golden light across the living room floor. The boys sat on the familiar quilted blanket, their picnic spot, surrounded by the quiet comfort of the room. Shoyuta sat nearby, not too close but close enough, a newly purchased book resting on his lap. Hitoshi eyed the book, the colorful cover a stark contrast to the plain, worn books he remembered from the lab. The edges were smooth, the illustrations bright and inviting. He could almost hear the gentle rustle of the pages, the promise of a story hidden within. But the weight of Shuta's next words hung over him. "Would you like to read this one, Hitoshi?" Shuta's voice was calm, unpressured. His dark eyes were steady, offering the choice rather than imposing it. Hitoshi's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. The instinctual response was to say no. To let Shoyuta read as he had before, allowing Hitoshi to listen and translate for Izuku, safe in the space between his brother and the story. But beneath the immediate fear was a quiet ache, a longing to be the one telling the story, to give Izuku the comfort of words like Shoyuta did. "I can't read very well," Hitoshi admitted, his voice a thin thread. His confession was met with nothing but a soft nod from Shoyuta. "That's okay," Shoyuta said. "I can read it if you'd rather. There's no rush." A moment passed, the stillness filled only with the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant chirping of birds outside. Hitoshi swallowed, his fingers loosening their grip. "I want to try." Shoyuta offered him the book, the gesture slow and careful. Hitoshi took it, the weight of it settling into his lap. Izuku shifted closer, his green eyes wide and expectant, a gentle nudge of encouragement that Hitoshi felt down to his bones. The cover showed a small fox with a bushy tail and a curious expression, standing at the edge of a vast forest. The title, "The Little Fox Finds His Way," curled in whimsical letters above its head. Hitoshi opened to the first page, his fingers brushing over the smooth paper. He could do this, one word at a time. "The little fox was all alone," he began, his voice halting. The first hurdle crossed. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He walked the woods, his paws sea cold on the ground. He stumbled on the word ground, the sounds tangling on his tongue. Shoyuta leaned in just a bit, his voice a low murmur. "Ground. Ground." Hitoshi nodded, his lips forming the word again. "Ground." He continued, each sentence a small battle, each page a quiet victory. As the story unfolded, it told of the little fox who wandered the forest, searching for a place where he felt safe. He met other animals, some kind, others wary, and slowly, the fox learned that home wasn't always a place but sometimes a feeling. There, in the hollow of an old tree, the fox found a soft bed of leaves. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found home. The final words left Hitoshi's lips with a soft exhale, his voice a little steadier than when he began. He glanced over at Izuku, who sat with his knees pulled to his chest, the blanket wrapped around him. Izuku's lips moved silently, echoing the last line of the story as if tasting the words himself. Home. Shura's expression remained soft, his dark eyes warm and filled with a pride he didn't try to hide. You did great, Hitoshi. Something in Hitoshi's chest loosened, a weight lifting off his shoulders. He had done it. He had read the story. He had given Izuku the gift of those gentle words, of the fox's journey. And maybe, just maybe, the fox wasn't the only one who had found his way. The realization settled quietly within him, a small ember of hope that glowed softly, warding off the shadows that had long taken root in his mind. He had never thought of himself as brave. Bravery was for heroes, for those who could walk through fear without stumbling. But here he was, with the weight of a story resting in his hands, and Izuku's soft gaze on him, filled with something he hadn't seen before, pride. Hitoshi's breath came a little easier, each inhale less sharp, each exhale a release. His shoulders, which had often felt like they were holding up the world, now hung with a softness he wasn't used to. He allowed himself to lean back slightly, his weight settling against the cool surface of the floor. The blanket beneath him was a familiar comfort, its worn fabric an anchor. And then Shura's hand. Not touching but close. A steady, quiet presence. The man had remained just at the edge of their safe space, a rock at the shore of their uncertain sea. Hitoshi glanced at him, expecting perhaps an acknowledgement, a soft word. But Shoyuta remained still, his posture open, his expression unreadable yet warm. It wasn't an invitation, it was permission. To rest, to breathe, to take up space. Hitoshi's fingers twitched, his body swaying just slightly. It was nothing dramatic, no sudden motion, but a gradual shift. He edged closer, the blanket crinkling beneath him, the gap between him and Shoyuta closing by inches. He didn't touch him, he wasn't ready for that, but his proximity spoke volumes. It was a silent whisper of trust, a quiet surrender to the safety Shoyuta had always offered but never forced. Izuku, nestled against his side, seemed to sense it too. His small hands slipped into Hitoshi's, and together, they remained there on the edge of something new, something warm. The room held them gently, the light through the window soft and golden, painting them in shades of quiet resilience. Could we? Hitoshi asked, voice small as his fingers traced the edges of the book. Could we read it again? Shoyuta nodded. As many times as you want. That night, long after the story had ended, Shoyuta found himself back at the small desk in their bedroom. His laptop cast a soft glow as he scrolled through more books, more stories of foxes and adventures, of characters finding their way home. And when Hizashi slipped into bed, his voice filled with a teasing warmth, Shoyuta didn't even pretend to be annoyed. Getting a little ahead of yourself, huh? Hizashi whispered, his arm slipping around Shura's waist, his cheek pressing against Shura's shoulder. Maybe, Shoyuta murmured, the cursor of the laptop hovered over the add to cart button. But I think we've all got a little more story to tell. And as the night wrapped around them, Shoyuta let himself believe it, let himself hope that the boys, like the little fox, would find their way. One story, one quiet step at a time. The afternoon sun cast warm patches of light across the living room, filtering through the sheer curtains and pooling on the soft quilt where Hitoshi and Izuku sat. The boys had claimed the corner of the room as their own, a small island of safety amidst the larger, still unknown world of the house. Coloring books lay open on the floor, waxy crayons scattered like tiny jewels, and the gentle rustle of paper filled the air. At the dining table, Shoyuta and Hizashi worked through a small pile of paperwork. It was a slow reintroduction to work life for Shoyuta, a few light tasks he'd requested from the agency to ease himself back into the rhythm of his job. Hizashi's presence beside him was a steadying one, his pen gliding over documents, his lips moving in a soft hum. The melody that slipped from Hizashi's lips was soft, almost absent-minded. It wound its way through the quiet room, a cheerful tune with no words, just a gentle rise and fall. He didn't even seem aware of it. His focus remained on the forms in front of him, his fingers tapping a gentle rhythm against the tabletop. Izuku's crayon paused mid-scribble. His head lifted, green eyes wide and curious as the sound threaded through his senses. He remembered the storm, the low hum of Hizashi's voice that had wound its way through his fear, a different tune then, soft and comforting. But this was lighter, brighter. It was like the sun through the curtains, warm and gentle. The black crayon in his hand moved again, this time in loops and lines, the yellow crayon following. Circles and squiggles filled the page, shapes that only Izuku understood. Hitoshi remained focused on his own page, his hand steady as he colored the soft green leaves of a tree. He didn't notice the way Izuku's attention drifted, how his crayon moved more to the rhythm of Hizashi's humming than to any particular design. A soft rustle of paper drew Hizashi's attention. He looked up just as Izuku rose to his feet, a paper clutched tightly in his small hands. The boy moved slowly, his feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor, his blanket trailing behind him like a shadow. Hizashi's hum faded, his lips stilling as his soft gaze settled on the approaching figure. He shared a quick glance with Shoyuta, who had noticed as well, both men still and quiet, giving Izuku the space to choose his pace. "Hey, little listener," Hizashi greeted softly when Izuku stopped a few steps away. "Did you need something?" Izuku hesitated, his fingers curling around the edges of the paper. His eyes darted to the side, his small shoulders curling in just a bit, but then, slowly, he stretched his hands forward, offering the drawing to Hizashi. Hizashi accepted it with the same gentle reverence he might show a fragile treasure. The paper was covered in bold black loops and splashes of yellow, the lines winding and curling in a chaotic pattern. It was messy, wild, and beautiful in its own way. Hizashi's breath hitched, his smile softening into something tender and warm. "Is this us?" he asked, his voice a whisper wrapped in affection. Izuku nodded, a quick, shy movement, and then before the moment could stretch too long he turned and ran back to Hitoshi, the blanket trailing behind him. Hizashi watched him go, his heart a soft, blooming ache in his chest. He glanced at Shoyuta, who had set his pen down, his dark eyes filled with something unspoken and raw. Neither of them moved, both savoring the small gift they had been given. But as the boys resumed their coloring, Hizashi noticed something else. The way Izuku's eyes lingered on him, not quite direct, but always returning. A quiet curiosity, a question that remained unasked. It wasn't fear, not the sharp, paralyzing kind that had once filled the space between them. It was softer, hesitant, the way a child might look at a door slightly ajar, wondering what lay beyond. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Lunch came and went, and the boys slipped back upstairs for their usual nap. The house settled into its soft rhythm, the hum of life threading through each room. But that curiosity, the quiet pull remained, woven into the edges of the day. By bedtime, the house had wrapped itself in stillness. Hitoshi had already drifted off, his breathing even, his body curled into the safety of their blankets. But Izuku lay awake, his eyes fixed on the half-open door, the hallway beyond dipped in soft shadows. When Hizashi passed by, his footsteps light and unhurried, Izuku found himself moving before he could think. His small feet touched the cool floor, his hands brushing the worn fabric of his blanket as he rose. He slipped into the hallway, his movements quiet, the way he had learned to be in the lab, silent, almost invisible. Hizashi didn't notice him at first. The man's back was to him, his body relaxed as he moved toward his bedroom. The soft hum returned, a quiet melody under his breath, the same gentle tune that had caught Izuku's attention earlier. It wrapped around the air, a whisper of warmth in the cool hallway. Shoyuta, who had been in the bedroom, noticed him first. His dark eyes found Izuku's small form lingering at the edge of the hall, his expression a mix of sleepiness and something else, something lost and searching. "What's wrong?" Shuta's voice was a soft rumble, pulling Hisashi's attention as well. The hum died on his lips, his gaze following Shuta's line of sight until he, too, saw Izuku standing there. Izuku's mouth opened, but no sound came. His hands fluttered, small motions that never quite formed a sign. The words, whatever they were, remained stuck behind the walls of his silence. The warmth of the hum, the softness of Hisashi's tune, the quiet safety of Shuta's voice, all of it tangled together, creating a need he didn't know how to express. A breath shuddered through him, and his feet moved back, the hallway stretching long and empty behind him. His bare toes curled against the floor, and before either man could reach him, could ask again, he turned and slipped back into their room. Hisashi and Shoyuta stood there, the space between them filled with the echoes of what wasn't said. Hisashi's lips pressed together, his hands curling into the fabric of his shirt as if to hold on to the moment. Shuta's expression remained steady, his dark eyes thoughtful, a shadow of concern beneath the calm. "What do you think he needed?" Hisashi asked, his voice a whisper. Shoyuta didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, his hand brushing against the closed door, a soft, barely there motion. "I'm not sure," he murmured. "But he'll tell us when he's ready." The next morning, the household woke to an undercurrent of tension. Izuku's mood was visibly frayed, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. His small frame seemed to carry a weight too heavy for his age, his shoulders hunched and his steps slow. Black whip coiled around him, not striking or flaring, but slipping through the air in slow, wary movements, a shadow of his unease. Hitoshi sat beside him, his own posture wound tight. He had spent the morning cycling through everything he could think of: gentle words, soft signs, even offering Izuku his favorite coloring book, but nothing worked. Izuku's expression remained pinched, his lips pressed into a thin line, his green eyes downcast. Izuku's silence wasn't new, but this kind of stillness was different. It was as if he had folded into himself, a small, impenetrable shell that even Hitoshi couldn't find a way through. The adults exchanged worried glances from the kitchen. Shoyuta set down his coffee, the cup barely touched, while Hisashi's hands hovered over the plate he was drying, the cloth clutched too tight between his fingers. "What happened?" Hisashi whispered, his voice threading through the soft clatter of the morning routine. "Did we do something wrong?" Shuta's expression was a careful mask, but beneath it was a tangle of uncertainty. "I don't know. I've been trying to think if we did or said anything yesterday that might have upset him." "Maybe he had a nightmare?" Hisashi suggested, but his tone lacked confidence. "Or maybe he wanted something but didn't know how to ask?" Shuta's eyes drifted to the boys. Hitoshi was signing to Izuku, asking him what's wrong, but the younger boy did not respond. "Hitoshi looks just as lost as we are." And it was true. Hitoshi, who always seemed to understand Izuku's needs, was visibly struggling. His fingers moved in small, uncertain signs, asking if Izuku was hungry, if he wanted to play, if he felt okay. Each question was met with a small, frustrated shake of Izuku's head. Black Whip, sensing the distress, rippled behind him, a cautious, watchful presence. Even bath time did not lift Izuku's spirit. The water lay still, and the boys sat side by side in the tub, their small bodies curled into themselves. Hitoshi washed Izuku's hair with gentle hands, his own expression tight with the effort of holding himself together. When lunch passed with no sign of improvement, the boys retreated to their room, closing the door with a soft click that felt far too final. The house seemed to exhale in their absence, but the quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, weighted with the unanswered question of what had gone wrong. The adults moved through the afternoon in a haze of worried glances and half-spoken thoughts. Shoyuta sifted through his paperwork without truly seeing it, his mind replaying every interaction from the day before, searching for the moment they might have lost the thread of connection. Hisashi cleaned dishes that weren't dirty, his hands moving in slow, absent circles over already spotless plates. As the afternoon began to slip into early evening, Hisashi approached the boys' room with a tray of snacks. He knocked softly, his knuckles brushing against the wood in a rhythm that had become familiar, 3 gentle taps. "Hey, little listeners. Can I come in?" Silence. Then, a small rustle of fabric, and the door opened just a crack, and Hitoshi's face appeared, his expression a mirror of Izuku's frustration. His violet eyes were dark with worry, his lips drawn into a thin, straight line. Hisashi felt a pang in his chest. He had seen Hitoshi angry, cautious, even afraid, but this was different. This was a helplessness that came from not knowing how to help someone he loved. "Hey!" Hisashi greeted softly, balancing the tray against his hip. "I brought you guys something to eat." The door opened just enough for Hisashi to slip through. His eyes fell on the boys, and the sight twisted something deep in his chest. Hitoshi looked worn, his violet eyes clouded with worry. Izuku sat beside him, knees drawn to his chest, his small frame almost swallowed by the blanket wrapped around him. Hisashi set the tray on the floor, the soft clink of the glasses a small, steady sound. He lowered himself to sit on the floor, keeping his movements slow and his posture open. "Izuku," he spoke the name like a whisper, a gentle thread meant to reach the boy without pulling too hard. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" Izuku didn't respond. His lips moved, not with words, but with the soft, erratic breaths of someone teetering on the edge of too many emotions. His hands twisted in the blanket, pulling the fabric tight against his small fists. Hitoshi sat down beside him, their shoulders touching. His own frustration had settled into a deep, aching sadness. He had never struggled to read Izuku before, never been in a place where his brother's needs felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Hisashi took a slow breath. He could see it the way Izuku's body was a taut string, every muscle pulled tight, the threads of his emotions knotted into something he couldn't unravel on his own. He drew a breath, his voice slipping into a soft hum. The same melody he had hummed during the storm, the gentle lullaby that had brought a sliver of calm into the chaos. The moment the melody slipped into the air, Izuku's head snapped up, his wide eyes fixed on Hisashi. It was immediate, a visceral response that pulled him from the fog of his own emotions. That was what he wanted. Izuku's breath hitched, the sound catching in his throat. His head lifted, his green eyes glassy and wide. The room seemed to hold still, every other sound fading into the background. Even Black Whip stilled, the tendrils folding in close, curling against the edge of the bed like a cat tucking its tail. Hitoshi glanced at his brother, his own breath slowing to match the rhythm of the lullaby. His fingers, which had been clenched tightly in the fabric of his pants, began to unfurl, his posture easing. Izuku didn't need words to say it. His small body unfolded, his feet shuffling across the floor, and before Hisashi could fully process it, the boy was at his side. Izuku's head found its way to Hisashi's chest, his small ear pressed against the place where the hum vibrated through skin and bone. His fingers clung to Hisashi's shirt, tiny fists curled into the fabric as if holding onto the melody itself. Hisashi didn't stop. He kept humming, his voice a quiet thread of warmth that wrapped around Izuku, pulling him into the safe, steady rhythm of the tune. His hand rested gently on Izuku's back, moving in slow, soothing circles. Shoyuta, who had been standing just by the threshold of the door, stayed still. His dark eyes softened as he watched the quiet exchange. Hitoshi remained close, his own posture easing, the tension that had bound him slowly unwinding as Izuku's breathing evened out. Izuku's eyes drifted closed, the vibrations of Hisashi's chest lulling him into a state of quiet calm. His mind drifted, not into the darkness of a nightmare, but into a softer memory, a green-haired woman with a gentle hum, her voice a warm echo of this same melody. He couldn't place the memory, couldn't find the words for it, but it felt safe. It felt real. And as the melody filled the room, Black Whip's tendrils withdrew, the last shadows of fear slipping away. Izuku's small body relaxed, his fingers uncurling, the weight of his own emotions finally finding rest. And in the quiet that followed, a new kind of peace settled over them all. The room was wrapped in a stillness that felt almost fragile, as if the slightest noise might shatter the quiet comfort that had settled over them. Hisashi's soft humming threaded through the silence, a gentle melody that seemed to weave itself into the very air. Izuku lay curled against him, his small body finally at rest, cradled in the warmth and safety of Hisashi's arms. His fingers had loosened their tight grip on the man's shirt, his breathing even, the lines of his face smoothed out by sleep. Hitoshi sat on the edge of the bed, his body hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees. His violet eyes were fixed on Izuku, but his gaze was distant, as if looking through him, lost somewhere deep in his own mind. His hands twisted the hem of his shirt, knuckles pale against the fabric. Each rise and fall of Izuku's chest should have brought him comfort, but instead, it only deepened the ache inside him. He should have felt relief. He did, in some small way, seeing his brother finally relax, the tight coil of anxiety unwinding enough to let him rest. It was a victory, a quiet one, but still it mattered. But beneath the relief was something else. Something darker and harder to name. An uncomfortable knot that tightened every time Hitoshi's hand moved in slow circles over Izuku's back, every time Izuku's small form shifted closer to him. Hitoshi swallowed against the tightness in his throat. He shouldn't feel this way. This selfishness. This gnawing fear that he was being left behind. He had spent years being Izuku's protector, the one constant in a world full of closed doors and cold voices. It had been his purpose, the only thing that had made sense in the chaos of the lab. He had been the shield, the barrier between Izuku and everything that threatened to break him. But now that they were safe, now that Izuku was finding comfort elsewhere, Hitoshi didn't know where he fit anymore. The thought wrapped around him like barbed wire, each twist digging deeper, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just jealousy. He wasn't jealous of Hitoshi, not really. He was grateful for the way the man had taken to Izuku, how his gentle hums could soothe what Hitoshi's words couldn't. But the bitterness was still there, a dark coil in his chest. Because if Izuku didn't need him to feel safe, if he didn't need him to be his protector anymore, then what was Hitoshi supposed to be? His mind spun with half-formed thoughts, crashing into each other like waves in a storm. He had been the protector for so long that he didn't know how to just be. Every instinct in him screamed to do something, to fix something, to shield someone. But there was no threat, no danger lurking around the corner. Just the soft hum of a lullaby and the sight of his little brother cradled safely in someone else's arms. He hated himself for it, for the surge of resentment, for the way his fists curled into the blanket so tightly his knuckles turned white. The fabric crumpled under his grip, a poor substitute for the control he felt slipping away. His vision blurred, and he bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to draw blood, the coppery taste grounding him, keeping him from making a sound. Hitoshi wanted to run. He wanted to hide. He wanted to reach out and pull Izuku away, to hold him close and remind him that it had always been them against the world. But the war LD had changed, and he wasn't sure where he fit in it anymore. His breath came in short, sharp pulls, his chest aching with the effort to keep himself together. It was too much. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, the soft lullaby threading through the air like a reminder of everything he couldn't give Izuku. He could feel his control slipping, the dam of his composure cracking under the weight of his own emotions. And he didn't know how to stop it, didn't know how to be anything but the shield. And what good was a shield when there were no more battles left to fight? His breath hitched, a small, ragged sound that barely made it past his lips. Shoyuta, who stood by the door, noticed. His dark eyes narrowed with a quiet understanding. He moved slowly, his presence a steady shadow as he knelt at the edge of the bed, his body a mirror to Hitoshi's hunched form. Hitoshi! Shuta's voice was a low murmur, his hand reaching out but not quite touching. What's wrong? Hitoshi's shoulders curled inward, his body shrinking into itself. His lips parted, words tangled on the edge of his tongue, but they wouldn't come. His vision blurred, and it wasn't until the first tear slipped free that he realized he was crying. It was silent, the kind of crying that started deep, too deep, and rose up slowly, a flood he couldn't stop. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Hitoshi's hum trailed off, his attention shifting fully to Hitoshi. His free hand continued to rub slow, calming circles on Izuku's back, but his expression was filled with the same gentle concern. It's okay, Hitoshi. You can tell us. I'm his big brother, Hitoshi whispered, his voice cracking. I've always been the one who kept him safe. And now, his breath caught, a sob hitching in his throat. Now he doesn't need me. What am I supposed to do if he doesn't need me? The confession hung in the air, raw and sharp. Hitoshi's fists clenched in his lap, the knuckles white. He felt exposed, his fear laid bare in a way he had never allowed before. He had always been the strong one, the protector, the shield. And now, he didn't know how to be anything else. Hisashi shifted, his body still a cradle for Izuku but his focus fully on Hitoshi. Being his brother isn't just about protecting him, Hitoshi. It's about being there in whatever way he needs. Sometimes that's a shield, and sometimes it's just being by his side. Shuda's voice joined the conversation, a quiet strength beneath the softness. Izuku still needs you. He always will. It's okay for him to find comfort in other things. It doesn't mean your place is gone, it just means his world is getting a little bigger. It's okay to feel this way, Shoyuta continued, his voice a low hum of calm. You've spent so long being strong for Izuku. It makes sense that it's hard to stop. But being strong doesn't always mean being the shield. Sometimes it means letting yourself feel. Letting us help you too. Hitoshi's lip quivered. But what if he doesn't want me around anymore? What if I just fade away? You won't, Shoyuta said, a quiet conviction in his tone. You're his brother, Hitoshi. That doesn't change. Izuku looks to you for so many things. You are his safe place. You're the one who knows him better than anyone. Hitoshi's fingers dug into the fabric of his pants, the texture grounding him. But if I'm not the one protecting him, what am I? Shuda's hand moved, a gentle squeeze. You're his brother. His family. You get to be a kid too, Hitoshi. You get to find out what you like, what makes you feel safe and happy. You get to have a life beyond the lab, beyond just keeping him safe. I don't know how to do that, he admitted, his voice small. I've never been anything else. That's okay, Shoyuta said. We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this. Hitoshi looked up then, his violet eyes rimmed with red, but there was a flicker of something beneath the sadness. A spark that had been buried beneath years of fear and responsibility. Really, Shoyuta affirmed. You don't have to have all the answers right now. One step at a time. Just like Izuku. Hitoshi's tears fell freely now, small rivers of salt that traced down his cheeks. His body trembled, the weight of his own emotions pressing down until he felt too small, too breakable. Shuda's hand rested gently on Hitoshi's shoulder, a quiet, steady presence, offering comfort without pressure. Hitoshi hesitated for only a moment before his body moved on its own. He leaned forward, his arms wrapping around Shuda's neck, and buried his face in the crook of the man's shoulder. His sobs broke free, quiet but unrestrained, his small frame shaking with the force of emotions he had kept buried for far too long. Slowly, with a gentleness that seemed to fill the room with warmth, Shuda's arms came up, wrapping around Hitoshi's trembling form. His hands settled softly on the boy's back, not holding tight but just enough to let Hitoshi know he was there solid, real, and safe. His touch was careful, a silent promise that Hitoshi was not too much, not a burden, just a boy who needed this moment to be anything but strong. Shuda's hand moved in slow, careful circles on Hitoshi's back, mirroring the comfort Hisashi had offered Izuku. His voice was a quiet murmur, words slipping through the melody. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to be scared. But you're not alone anymore, Hitoshi. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. And as the room settled into the quiet rhythm of Shuda's voice, of Hisashi's hum, of Izuku's soft breaths, Hitoshi allowed himself to let go. The dam broke, and with it, the weight he had been holding for so long. His fingers loosened, his body eased, and in the safety of that room, surrounded by the quiet strength of the adults who had promised to keep them safe, Hitoshi found a small, fragile piece of himself that he thought had been lost. The room remained steeped in quiet, the only sounds the soft rustle of fabric, the gentle hum of breathing, and the quiet murmur of Shuda's voice as he spoke to Hitoshi. His words were a steady current, pulling the boy back from the edge of his fear, offering a safe harbor where he could simply exist. After a while, Hitoshi's sobs softened, the tension in his small frame easing into something closer to exhaustion. His grip on Shuda's shirt loosened, his fingers slipping free, and his head rested heavily against Shuda's shoulder. His breaths evened out, Each exhale a little longer, a little deeper, until sleep claimed him. Shoyuta moved carefully, shifting Hitoshi until he was lying on the bed. The boy's red nose and puffy eyes were a stark contrast to the soft rise and fall of his chest, his body finally at rest. Shoyuta lay beside him, his arm a steady presence across Hitoshi's back, not trapping but holding, a quiet promise that he was there. Hitoshi, still cradling Izuku, moved to the bed as well. He settled in slowly, his back against the wall, Izuku nestled in his arms. The boy shifted in his sleep, his hand reaching out unconsciously, finding Hitoshi's fingers and curling into them. The moment he made contact, Izuku's small body relaxed completely, his lips parting in a soft, contented sigh. The two adults lay in silence, the room bathed in the soft twilight glow. Their eyes met across the small space, a conversation passing between them without words. It was a conversation of shared breaths, of gentle nods, of the understanding that this quiet, this warmth, this fragile peace was everything. Shuda's voice broke the quiet, a low rumble that barely disturbed the air. I never thought I'd see them like this. Hitoshi's thumb continued to trace small circles on Izuku's back. Like what? Safe. Shuda's hand rested against Hitoshi's back, the rise and fall of the boy's breathing a steady rhythm against his palm. For so long, I've only seen kids who have already been broken. But they're still here. Still fighting. Hitoshi's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. They're stronger than we'll ever understand. But so are you, Sho. You give them space to heal. You let them be kids. I worry, Shoyuta admitted, that I'm not doing enough. That I'm going to make a mistake. We all worry, Hitoshi said. But you show up. You're here. And that's what matters. Shuda's fingers moved gently through Hitoshi's hair, brushing away the strands that had stuck to his damp cheeks. I never thought I'd want this. A family. Hitoshi leaned his head back against the wall, his own breathing steady and soft. Neither did I. But now, I can't imagine anything else. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighted. Shuda's hand stilled on Hitoshi's back. Do you ever think about making it official? Adopting them? Hitoshi's breath caught, his eyes searching Shuda's face. Do you? Sometimes, Shoyuta admitted. I want them to know this isn't temporary. That they aren't just here until something else comes along. I want them to know they have a home. Hitoshi's expression softened, a warmth blooming in his eyes. I think they already feel that, Sho. But making it official, giving them that security, it could be good. I don't want to rush them, Shoyuta said. But maybe we start looking into it. When they're ready. Hitoshi's fingers threaded through Izuku's curls, his thumb brushing over the boy's temple. Whenever they're ready, we'll be here. They fell into a comfortable quiet, their conversation slipping back into the silence. The room held them, wrapped in the dim glow of the setting sun, and as the evening deepened, the four of them remained together, a patchwork family stitched together by quiet moments and soft promises.